The story begins with a boy lying injured on the ground. His body is covered in wounds, and even keeping his eyes open feels difficult. As he struggles to remain conscious, he reflects on the strange situation he has found himself in. He cannot even remember his own name. The only thing he is aware of is that this world is different from the one he once knew. For this reason, he wonders whether he has somehow been transferred into another world. However, the realization does not bring him excitement or curiosity. Instead, he remains completely indifferent. In his mind, it would not make much difference even if the place where he eventually died changed. He views himself as an empty existence, a vacant human life with no purpose and no attachment to anything. Just as those hopeless thoughts continue to fill his mind, a voice suddenly reaches him asking whether he is alive. That single voice becomes the turning point of his life. The scene reveals a beautiful witch kneeling beside him. As she gently holds his face and looks down at him with concern, the narration explains that the one who ultimately gives him a reason to live is this very witch. The story then shifts forward by 1 year. A small house can be seen standing peacefully on top of a hill. Inside the house, within a cozy bedroom, the boy slowly opens his eyes after waking up. The moment he becomes fully conscious, his eyes widen in shock. He immediately realizes that he is currently facing a very serious problem. Lying beside him is the witch herself. Not only is she sleeping next to him, but she is also hugging him tightly as though it is the most natural thing in the world. The boy instantly sits upright in panic. Meanwhile, the witch remains completely relaxed. Without even seeming bothered by the situation, she lazily reminds him that she still has many things left to teach him. As she speaks, his gaze accidentally drifts toward her chest. The realization immediately makes him nervous. He quickly gulps and desperately tries to maintain his composure. The next scene shows him preparing breakfast in the kitchen. While cutting onions, he repeatedly reinforces a single thought in his mind. He tells himself to focus. He reminds himself that he must not lose his cool. He repeatedly wishes for his distracting desires to disappear. The poor boy is clearly fighting a difficult battle against his own thoughts. A short while later, the witch enters the kitchen while yawning sleepily and greets him with a cheerful good morning. The narration reveals that the boy has been given the name Alba. Respectfully, he responds by calling her his master. The witch glances around the kitchen and notices the surprisingly extravagant breakfast spread covering the table. Looking at the numerous dishes, she wonders what occasion is being celebrated today. Since she cannot remember any special event taking place, she becomes curious about why he prepared such an impressive meal. Alba explains that there is no special occasion. Since he woke up at dawn, he simply decided to make breakfast. However, while cooking, he gradually became more enthusiastic and ended up preparing far more food than originally planned. The witch immediately reacts to a different part of his explanation. Upon hearing that he woke up at dawn, she becomes concerned and asks whether he is getting enough sleep. She warns him that skipping sleep is unhealthy and that he should never sacrifice his rest. While listening to her lecture, Alba cannot help thinking that she herself is the reason he struggles to sleep properly. After all, constantly sharing a bed with an incredibly attractive witch does not exactly make resting easy. Naturally, he keeps that thought entirely to himself. Instead, he calmly points out that she should wash her face first since her bed hair has become particularly impressive this morning. Still yawning, she casually replies that she will take care of it later. Soon afterward, the two begin eating breakfast together. The witch immediately starts enjoying the food. Her eyes light up with delight as she praises Alba's cooking and declares it delicious. Alba responds that he is simply happy if the food suits her tastes. After taking another bite, she suggests that perhaps waking up a little earlier from time to time would not be such a bad idea if breakfasts like this are the result. However, Alba suddenly decides to bring up a topic that has been bothering him for quite some time. There is something he wishes to suggest to his master. Curious, she asks what it is. After listening to his proposal, her reaction becomes explosive. Alba's suggestion is simple. He wants them to start sleeping in separate rooms. From his perspective, the request sounds completely reasonable. Unfortunately for him, the witch strongly disagrees. She immediately declares that a master and disciple should always remain together. According to her, they should stay beside each other while eating, while sleeping, and during everything in between. Trying to point out the inconsistency in her argument, Alba reminds her that they already bathe separately. The moment those words leave his mouth, the witch freezes. Her eyes widen and her face instantly turns bright red. She accuses him of saying something shameless. Meanwhile, Alba becomes awkward after witnessing such an exaggerated reaction. Ignoring his confusion, she firmly explains her reasoning. According to her, a disciple must carefully observe every movement of their master. Only through constant observation can proper techniques, postures, and magical knowledge be learned. Therefore, the very idea that Alba wishes to reduce the amount of time he spends around her is unacceptable. She even dramatically asks whether he no longer wants to learn anything from her. Hesitantly, Alba points out that what she is really saying is that she simply prefers sleeping in the same room. The witch immediately protests and claims that he is making it sound as though she personally wants to sleep beside him. In response, Alba silently thinks that this is exactly the truth. The witch then asks whether he truly hates it that much. Realizing that continuing the discussion is pointless, Alba quickly gives up. He accepts her decision and declares the matter closed. The moment she hears this, her eyes begin sparkling. She happily grabs his arm and beams with satisfaction. As this happens, Alba reflects on the real problem currently affecting his life. The problem is not magic. The problem is not training. The problem is that he has become the disciple of an unbelievably clingy master. He practically has no privacy whatsoever. This thought causes him to wonder how things ended up this way. His memories then drift back to the past as the story transitions to the day their master-disciple relationship officially began. At that time, the witch introduces herself properly. She reveals that her name is Lineria Senior and proudly announces that she is an immortal witch. Curious, Alba asks exactly how great she really is. Lineria confidently replies that explaining her greatness properly would take a very long time. The two smile at each other as the conversation continues. She then begins explaining a piece of ancient history. Long ago, humanity shared the world with demons. These demons were humanity's greatest enemy. Upon hearing this, Alba thinks that the story sounds remarkably similar to the setting of an RPG game. Lineria continues by explaining that demons were not opponents humanity could defeat through ordinary means such as swords and bows. Humanity was gradually pushed toward extinction. At this point, Alba assumes that his master must have appeared and saved everyone. Unfortunately, Lineria immediately crushes his expectation. With a smug grin, she reveals that she was not the one who appeared. Alba silently laments his incorrect guess. Instead, the savior of humanity was a legendary figure known as the Great Sage. The Great Sage developed music-based magic that became humanity's ultimate weapon against the demons. He also established a magical academy, allowing magical knowledge to spread throughout the world. After finishing the story, Lineria finally explains what makes her special. She proudly reveals that she was one of only 13 sages who received direct instruction from the Great Sage himself. A smug expression instantly appears on her face. Alba is genuinely impressed. Only 13 individuals in the entire world received such an honor. However, Lineria then casually adds that this status only lasted for about a year during her permit renewal period. The statement completely ruins the grandeur of the revelation. Alba can only stare in disappointment. Wondering what permit renewal even has to do with becoming a sage, he remains speechless. Lineria quickly insists that even if it was only for 1 year, it is still an incredible achievement. She repeatedly emphasizes just how great she is. Watching her proudly praise herself, Alba realizes that she genuinely loves talking about her own accomplishments. Eventually, another question comes to mind. Since she claims to be immortal, he asks how old she actually is. Smiling proudly, she reveals that she is currently 113 years old. The moment he hears this, Alba unintentionally thinks of her as an old lady. Almost immediately, Lineria narrows her eyes and claims that it feels as though he is thinking something rude. Alba hurriedly denies everything. Ignoring the suspicious timing, she continues speaking. Declaring that a person without a name cannot properly begin a new life, she announces that from this moment onward he shall be known as Alba. She further declares that she will fill his previously empty life by teaching him magic. As magical lights flash around them, Alba's eyes widen. The atmosphere suddenly feels far more significant. Lineria then proudly reminds him that he is about to receive instruction from the Supreme Witch standing before him and that he should feel honored. Alba's eyes begin shining with excitement and he immediately agrees. However, Lineria suddenly looks disappointed. She explains that his response lacks the appropriate amount of gratitude. Since she will personally teach him magic, she believes he should show greater appreciation. After all, teaching others is not necessarily enjoyable. Realizing what she wants to hear, Alba enthusiastically declares that he will be in her care from this day forward. Then, after a brief moment of hesitation, he finally addresses her properly as his master. The effect is immediate. Lineria becomes emotional and tears begin forming in her eyes. Apparently, hearing those two words affects her far more than expected. She softly comments that he occasionally says very nice things. Feeling awkward, Alba can only smile in response. Lineria quickly regains her composure and warns him that she has no intention of leaving his education incomplete. For this reason, she promises to be extremely strict with his training. Alba immediately accepts her declaration. Thus begins the story of Alba and Lineria Senior, the immortal witch who rescues an empty young man from despair, gives him a name, teaches him magic, and eventually becomes the overwhelmingly affectionate master who refuses to leave his side for even a moment. The next scene focuses on Alba's magical education as Lineria continues teaching him the fundamental principles of magic. Sitting beside him, she explains that magic in this world is performed by infusing magical energy into magic circles. Through those circles, commands are transmitted to tiny particles known as magic elements. Once those magic elements receive the proper instructions, they initiate a wide variety of supernatural phenomena. According to her explanation, the entire sequence, beginning with magical energy and ending with the resulting phenomenon, is what people refer to as magic. However, despite her detailed explanation, Alba struggles to grasp the concept properly. As he attempts to draw the necessary magical circles, Lineria continuously points out mistakes in his work. She repeatedly explains that he is doing it incorrectly and that his commands lack clarity. While giving her explanations, she gradually leans closer and closer toward him. She insists that he carefully observe her examples and imitate them exactly. Every time she notices another mistake, she moves even closer so she can point at the details he is missing. Eventually, she is practically leaning over him while explaining the structure of the circles. Unfortunately, Alba finds himself unable to focus on the lesson anymore. Rather than concentrating on magic, his attention is entirely occupied by the fact that the beautiful witch is only inches away from him. Lineria continues explaining that he must pay attention and that sloppy lines will never allow him to cast proper magic. As she lectures him, she casually places a finger against his cheek in order to direct his attention toward the scroll. The unexpected contact causes Alba to gasp. His face immediately turns red, making his embarrassment even worse. Unable to endure it any longer, he finally blurts out that she is simply too close to him and that her proximity is making him overly conscious of her presence, preventing him from concentrating. For a few moments, Lineria simply stares at him. Then a look of realization appears on her face. She quickly moves away before loudly accusing him of trying to change the subject. Alba immediately gives up and repeatedly agrees with whatever she says. Even though the lesson continues, the atmosphere remains awkward for quite some time afterward. The story then shifts away from magic lessons and begins showcasing Lineria's everyday lifestyle. The narration reveals that despite being a legendary immortal witch, her daily habits are surprisingly careless. One scene shows Alba cooking in the kitchen while Lineria quietly approaches him from behind. Without warning, she leans against him and asks what he is doing. Alba responds that the answer should be obvious simply by looking. He also points out that she is standing far too close again and warns her that it is dangerous to crowd someone while they are cooking. Instead of accepting the criticism, Lineria becomes grumpy. She asks whether that was supposed to be a command. The fact that he would dare tell his master what to do clearly irritates her. Alba can only sigh and complain that she is unbelievably stubborn. He turns his head away in disappointment while wondering what exactly she finds so entertaining about bothering him. Hearing this, Lineria immediately becomes curious. Her eyes sparkle as she asks what he means by saying there is nothing fun there. Then, with complete sincerity, she points out that he is standing there. To her, his presence alone makes the situation interesting. The moment he hears that response, Alba immediately realizes that she is saying those kinds of things again. Before he can properly react, she circles around him and asks what he plans to do next. Alba answers that he intends to finish the laundry. As he enters the bedroom, he immediately notices the chaotic state of the room. Clothes, books, scrolls, and various magical materials are scattered everywhere. Looking around at the mess, he respectfully comments that his master's lifestyle is truly unpolished. Lineria completely ignores the criticism. Instead, she begins explaining that a disciple should always follow their master's example no matter what the master does. Alba immediately points out that reality currently feels like the complete opposite. Rather than following her example, he spends most of his time cleaning up after her. To him, the arrangement hardly seems fair. While looking around the room, he suddenly asks whether she has been drinking since the morning. Lineria instantly denies the accusation at the top of her lungs. She then reminds him that they have another magic lesson scheduled for the afternoon. Since there is still plenty of time before then, she insists that he should spend the remaining hours however he likes. Alba agrees, but also suggests that instead of constantly meddling with him, she should spend her time doing something meaningful. Curious, he asks whether she has any hobbies. The question immediately offends Lineria. She loudly declares that she certainly has hobbies. Then, with great pride, she announces that her favorite hobby is watching over her disciple. Hearing that answer causes Alba to place a hand over his forehead in complete disappointment. Unable to think of an appropriate response, he simply leaves the room. As he walks away, Lineria teasingly remarks that she wishes time would hurry up and skip directly to the afternoon lecture. The scene later shifts to Alba studying alone. He reviews the material from his previous lessons while examining a magical scroll. According to his notes, scrolls are convenient tools that allow users to cast spells simply by channeling magical energy into them. However, despite understanding the theory, he has not yet become capable of creating proper scrolls himself. While carefully studying one of Lineria's completed examples, he lets out a frustrated sigh. No matter how much he looks at it, he cannot understand how she manages to create such intricate magical patterns. He admits that he cannot even come close to reproducing something of that quality and concludes that his master truly is amazing. Unfortunately, he does not realize that Lineria is standing directly behind him. The moment she hears him praising her abilities, a pleased smile appears on her face. She suddenly speaks up, startling him. Looking at his work, she comments that his drawing is quite messy. Alba immediately becomes embarrassed. Lineria continues examining the failed scroll and asks whether the wasted paper bothers him. After all, there are piles of spare sheets scattered throughout the house. Alba explains that the waste does bother him. Since she is the one teaching him, he feels guilty whenever he uses up resources without producing results. At that moment, a mischievous smirk appears on Lineria's face. She casually remarks that having such a talentless disciple is troublesome and that acting properly as a master is truly a difficult task. Although she is obviously teasing him, Alba becomes even more embarrassed after hearing those words. Feeling discouraged, he quietly states that if that is truly how she feels, he can simply leave. The statement instantly changes the atmosphere. Lineria's confident expression disappears as she hesitantly asks why he would say something like that. Alba explains that he does not want to remain a talentless disciple who only causes trouble for his master. He believes that if he continues depending on her every single day, he will eventually become a hopeless person. Before he can continue, Lineria repeatedly tells him not to ignore her. Alba raises his voice as well and declares that he is seriously considering leaving the house. There are many abandoned buildings scattered throughout the surrounding area, and he believes he could at least manage to secure food for himself if necessary. The moment those words leave his mouth, Lineria begins trembling. She appears genuinely shaken by the idea. Then she suddenly demands to know how the conversation became so serious. Alba insists that he is only suggesting what he believes would be best. In response, Lineria shouts even louder that she never once said he was a nuisance. The argument escalates as both of them begin talking over each other. Eventually, Lineria blurts out that he is an idiot. The unexpected statement causes Alba to fall silent. Lineria then explains that she has never once considered him a burden. If she truly viewed him as a nuisance, she would have thrown him out of the house long ago. Hearing those words immediately quiets him. Seeing that she finally has his attention, her expression softens considerably. A gentle smile appears on her face as she admits that despite the increased workload, she feels fortunate to have someone like him around. Living together has allowed her to realize many things about herself. For a very long time she lived alone, and while solitude certainly has advantages, she believes that if she were alone again she would eventually lose motivation and become a boring person. Alba listens carefully before hesitantly asking whether she considers him family. Lineria gently pats his head. Rather than directly calling him family, she says that he is like family. She explains that this is precisely why she could never see him as a burden. In fact, even if there were 2 or 3 versions of him running around, she doubts she would consider them nuisances. She would probably welcome them instead. After all, she proudly reminds him that she is a magnificent master with extraordinary tolerance. As she says this, a warm smile remains on her face. Alba lowers his gaze slightly, feeling his face grow warm. Linaria continues speaking and explains that although having additional disciples would certainly make things livelier, training disciples requires enormous amounts of effort and resources. After considering the matter for a moment, she estimates that she could probably handle 5 or 6 more disciples at most. Hearing such a surprisingly specific number causes Alba to comment that he never expected his master to be such a greedy person. The conversation then takes a different direction. Alba asks why she has never started a family of her own. As he asks the question, he cannot help comparing disciples to children. When he thinks about how excited she becomes whenever she talks about disciples, Linaria almost resembles a young woman dreaming about married life and a large family. The comparison forms in his mind so naturally that he finds himself genuinely curious about her answer. Meanwhile, Linaria simply stares at him in confusion and asks what exactly he means by that question, bringing the scene to an end while setting up the next part of their conversation. The conversation continues after Alba asks why Linaria has never started a family despite living for more than a century. From his perspective, it seems strange that someone with such a long life would choose to spend so many years alone. He hesitantly explains that while she could have married someone, raised children, and lived happily together with a family, she instead chose to spend over 100 years living by herself among these old ruins. For several seconds, Linaria simply stares at him. At first, she appears to be seriously considering the question. However, the moment she fully understands the implication behind his words, her entire face turns bright red. She immediately explodes in embarrassment, loudly declaring that she dislikes those kinds of jokes and accusing him of being incredibly rude. According to her, saying something like that directly to a woman's face indicates that there is something seriously wrong with him. Alba is completely caught off guard by the intensity of her reaction. From his perspective, he merely asked a reasonable question. Confused, he wonders what there is to become so angry about. Then, without realizing the danger of what he is about to say, he casually remarks that there is no way she could still be a virgin after all those years. The instant those words leave his mouth, complete silence fills the room. Not even the slightest sound can be heard. The atmosphere becomes so still that Alba immediately realizes he has made a terrible mistake. Fear slowly begins creeping into his heart as he looks toward Linaria. Meanwhile, her face twitches slightly before she suddenly grabs him by the collar. Demanding an explanation, she repeatedly asks what he means by all those years and insists that he explain himself properly. Alba immediately looks away, his confidence vanishing completely. Unable to think of a proper response, he awkwardly mutters that he guesses he is sorry. Unfortunately, that answer only makes things worse. Linaria furiously demands to know what he means by guess and continues scolding him for quite some time before the argument finally settles down. Some time later, the atmosphere has returned to normal. Both of them are now relaxing in the living room as though nothing happened. Alba sits quietly on a sofa while reading a book related to magic. Meanwhile, Linaria has sprawled herself across the same sofa. Rather than sitting properly, she uses Alba as a convenient backrest, leaning her entire body against him while casually reading another book. After enduring this situation for a while, Alba hesitantly points out that she is surprisingly heavy. The moment those words reach her ears, she pinches him without mercy. Alba immediately cries out in pain while Linaria angrily demands to know who exactly he is calling heavy. As he complains that it hurts, she criticizes him for making such a rude remark toward his master. According to her, she is merely watching over her disciple while he studies. Alba quickly points out that she is not actually watching him at all and is simply reading a book herself. Hearing this causes Linaria to pout in dissatisfaction while Alba can only let out a tired sigh. As he continues reading, a thought suddenly enters his mind. He begins wondering whether their daily life is actually leading anywhere. Every day seems to consist of magical studies, household chores, preparing meals, and listening to his master's strange comments. Although their days are peaceful, he cannot help questioning whether there is some larger purpose behind everything they are doing. Linaria answers without hesitation. According to her, the purpose of their daily life is to maintain that very peace. She believes they have already achieved something valuable simply by creating a comfortable life free from conflict and danger. Alba cannot help narrowing his eyes at that response. To him, it sounds suspiciously similar to someone who wants to remain hidden from society forever. For this reason, he directly asks whether she simply wants to live the life of a shut-in. Linaria immediately becomes serious. She explains that the outside world is dangerous and filled with malice. She reminds Alba that he spent time in the capital and should already understand how cruel people can be. In her view, human beings are creatures who often care only about themselves. For this reason, she believes that nobody will truly look out for him when he is suffering. Nobody will willingly reach out a helping hand, and nobody will save him simply out of kindness. Alba quietly listens to her words. However, one detail immediately stands out to him. If everything she says is true, then her own actions contradict that belief entirely. Looking toward her, he gently points out that she herself reached out to him. After all, she was the one who found an injured stranger who could not even remember his own name and decided to save him. Lineria quickly dismisses the observation and claims that he was simply lucky. According to her, normal people would never bother helping someone in his condition. From her perspective, his survival was nothing more than a fortunate coincidence. Yet Alba remains unconvinced. There is still something he wants to understand. For this reason, he asks why she chose to save him. The moment the question is asked, Lineria casually places her book over her face, using it as a shield while claiming that it was merely a whim. Alba accepts the answer for a moment before asking another question. If saving him was simply a whim, then why did she welcome him into her home afterward? Why did she allow him to stay? Why did she spend an entire year teaching him magic and looking after him? The more he thinks about it, the harder it becomes to believe that everything happened merely on a whim. A faint smile appears on Alba's face as he asks one final question. If she encountered another person in the same situation today, would she save them as well? Lineria falls silent. For several moments, she carefully considers the question while keeping the book over her face. Eventually, she gives her answer. Rather than confidently declaring that she would save them, she quietly says that she thinks she is good for now. Although the response sounds casual, Alba immediately understands the implication hidden behind those words. She already has one troublesome disciple occupying her life and apparently has no desire to take in another. The story then abruptly shifts away from the peaceful atmosphere of their home. Far away, an enormous castle stands beneath the night sky. Numerous magical lights glow from within its walls, illuminating the darkness surrounding it and giving the structure an eerie yet majestic appearance. Deep inside the castle, a strange figure slowly walks through one of the stone corridors. The figure is not human. Instead, it is a small teddy bear carrying a hammer. Despite its unusual appearance, the teddy bear calmly makes its way through the hallway without any sign of concern. Everything appears peaceful until something suddenly catches its attention. Instinctively, the teddy bear looks upward. The moment it does, terror immediately fills its face. A gigantic monster is approaching from the opposite direction. Each of its footsteps is heavy enough to create a faint vibration throughout the corridor. Its enormous body casts a long shadow that stretches across the floor. The closer the monster gets, the more frightened the teddy bear becomes. Eventually, the monster notices the tiny bear as well and lowers its gaze toward it. The teddy bear freezes completely. For several tense seconds, neither of them moves. Then the monster opens its frightening mouth and appears to say something. Unfortunately, the words are completely inaudible. The teddy bear can only stare in confusion and fear while desperately trying to understand what was said. To its surprise, the monster does not attack. Instead, it simply walks past without slowing down. The massive creature continues moving deeper into the castle as though nothing unusual has happened. The teddy bear remains frozen in place for several moments before finally relaxing once the monster has disappeared from sight. Completely bewildered by the encounter, it wonders what exactly the monster had been trying to say. No answer comes, however. Meanwhile, somewhere deeper within the castle, the mysterious monster continues advancing toward an unknown destination. With that unsettling image lingering in the background, the story quietly begins setting up its next major development. The story shifts back to Alba's magical training as Lineria introduces a new lesson. This time, she announces that they will be studying summoning magic. The moment Alba hears the topic, his interest immediately skyrockets. Excitedly, he asks whether that means they are finally going to create familiars. Like many fantasy stories he knows from his previous world, the word summoning instantly makes him imagine powerful magical companions, mythical beasts, and loyal creatures fighting alongside their master. Unfortunately, Lineria quickly crushes those expectations. She explains that the type of summoning magic they will be practicing today has nothing to do with creating familiars. According to her, ordinary summoning magic is primarily used for calling existing objects. While there are indeed advanced magical techniques capable of creating familiars, those methods are far beyond Alba's current level. She further explains that many magicians who appear to possess familiars are actually using spiritual control techniques to tame and command ordinary animals. There also exists an uncommon category of magic capable of creating entirely new creatures through the manipulation of a human soul. To demonstrate, she casually swings her staff, causing an owl to suddenly materialize beside her. The bird quietly perches nearby as though it has always been there. After showing off the spell, Lineria proudly declares that such high-class magic remains completely unattainable for a small fry like Alba. Hearing himself called a small fry once again immediately irritates him. However, before he can complain, Lineria continues her explanation. Compared to advanced familiar creation, summoning magic is considerably simpler. The required magic circles consume very few resources, and even people with extremely limited magical power can cast the spell successfully. Hearing this causes Alba's mood to improve. If the spell truly requires little magical power, then even someone like him might be able to use it effectively. Lineria proceeds to explain the process in detail. First, the caster must decide what type of object they wish to summon. It could be food, a tool, or some other item. After deciding on the category, they must define the object's boundaries and characteristics. They must also determine whether the target is a living creature or an inanimate object. While explaining, she kneels down and begins drawing an incredibly complicated magic circle on the ground. Numerous symbols, lines, and markings rapidly appear beneath her hand. Once she finishes, she confidently points at the completed diagram and announces that it is done. Alba stares at the drawing in disbelief. From his perspective, the circle looks impossibly complicated. He immediately protests that there is absolutely no way he can reproduce something like that. Even though Lineria attempts to explain the process through one of her strange educational songs, the complexity remains overwhelming. Seeing his reaction, she explains another important detail. While the magic circle serves as the prerequisite for calling an object, the actual item that appears is selected based on the caster's knowledge and imagination. The summoned object is not chosen with complete precision. Instead, the magic interprets the user's thoughts and produces something related to them. This explanation only confuses Alba further. If the result is random, then he struggles to understand the practical value of the spell. The moment he voices that concern, Lineria becomes annoyed. She complains that she does not want to hear any criticism after spending so much effort trying to find a spell simple enough for a small fry like him to use. Unfortunately, Alba is barely paying attention anymore. While she continues speaking, a breeze suddenly passes through the area. The wind causes Lineria's skirt to flutter slightly. Alba's eyes unintentionally drift downward, and for a brief moment he catches sight of pink underwear beneath her skirt. His brain immediately freezes. Without thinking, he quietly blurts out the color he just saw. The moment the words leave his mouth, Lineria loudly orders him to stop wasting time and start practicing. Alba awkwardly agrees and quickly tries to focus on the lesson before things become even more embarrassing. As he prepares the spell, his thoughts begin drifting elsewhere. He reflects on his own shortcomings. Compared to most magicians, his magical power is extremely limited. The number of spells he can use is also disappointingly small. For this reason, he sometimes wonders whether there is any real value in someone like him studying magic. Even so, he refuses to give up. Lineria gave purpose to what was once an empty life. Therefore, he does not want her to see him acting pathetic or defeated. Determined to succeed, Alba raises his hand and activates the summoning spell. A faint light appears, the magic circle glows, and moments later an object materializes before them. Lineria immediately picks up the mysterious item and begins examining it. She notes that it is white, lightweight, and possesses a pleasant smell. However, despite studying it carefully, she cannot identify what it is supposed to be. Meanwhile, Alba stands frozen in absolute shock. Unlike Lineria, he recognizes the object immediately. It is a disposable diaper from his original world. The realization leaves him speechless. He immediately decides that explaining the object's purpose would only create problems. After all, the reason he summoned it is embarrassingly obvious. His concentration had been disrupted by the glimpse of Lineria's underwear moments earlier. As a result, his subconscious thoughts influence the spell's outcome and produce something associated with those thoughts. However, beneath the embarrassment lies a remarkable discovery. If summoning magic can produce objects from his previous world, then the possibilities are enormous. Even if the results are somewhat random, it may still be possible to summon useful modern items as long as he understands them well enough. For the first time since beginning his magical education, he starts feeling genuinely hopeful about the future potential of magic. While Alba is lost in thought, Lunaria narrows her eyes suspiciously and comments that he is probably thinking about something filthy again. Alba immediately denies the accusation. At the same time, the story shifts away from Alba and Lunaria entirely. Far away, inside the mysterious castle introduced earlier, 3 teddy bears have gathered together in a hidden section of the underground basement. One of the bears finally announces that it has reached the limit of its patience. According to him, they have spent the last 70 years trapped in the underground sections of the castle, and he questions whether it is truly necessary to continue protecting the monster that resides there forever. Another teddy bear responds by reminding him of reality. They are magical beings created by their mistress, and as creations born through magic, their freedom is extremely limited. There is very little they can do to change their circumstances. The teddy bear encountered earlier in the corridor joins the discussion and remarks that this has simply become their mistress's lifestyle. Another bear elaborates further, explaining that their life force is directly connected to their mistress. If she dies, they die alongside her. Such a fate is unavoidable for magical beings, since their existence is fundamentally tied to the existence of their creator. The first bear, whose name is revealed to be Reimu, becomes increasingly frustrated. He acknowledges that he already understands all of that. However, he points out that their mistress is supposedly an immortal witch. Since her death is practically impossible, he sees no reason why they should continue desperately guarding her. He wonders whether they should simply start living according to their own wishes. One of the other bears cautiously asks whether he is seriously suggesting defection. Reimu immediately tells them not to say such dangerous words out loud. No matter how brave he pretends to be, the thought of certain individuals overhearing the conversation terrifies him. The others comment that if he continues speaking so recklessly, it would not be surprising if he ended up being disposed of somewhere. In their opinion, he should be grateful for being allowed to survive this long. The conversation gradually shifts toward their mistress herself. One of the bears admits that it sometimes wonders why they continue serving a creature they barely understand. After all, a full century has passed since their mistress transformed into a monster, yet the curse afflicting her still has not been removed. At this point, Reimu reveals that he possesses important information. He claims to have discovered the location of a neighboring magician who possesses considerable magical power. If his information is correct, that magician could potentially become a new source of magical energy and support. In other words, migration might actually be possible. The other bears immediately dismiss the idea and question whether he has any guarantee whatsoever that life elsewhere would be better. Reimu loudly insists that almost anywhere would be preferable to their current situation. He declares that he would gladly choose another home over spending every night inside a damp castle filled with mold while serving a terrifying monster. The other bears remark that his comments are surprisingly ruthless, yet Reimu remains completely unapologetic. In fact, he goes even further by arguing that if their caretaker were a cute girl instead of a monster, their lives would be infinitely better. Growing increasingly enthusiastic, he proposes that they leave immediately. Unfortunately, fate chooses that exact moment to intervene. A large shadow suddenly appears behind them. The monster from earlier has arrived. Reimu instantly freezes as the creature calmly asks where exactly they intend to go. The moment he hears that voice, Reimu practically screams internally and immediately runs away as fast as his tiny legs can carry him. The remaining teddy bears stay behind. Trying to remain polite, they nervously greet the monster and ask whether something is wrong. In response, the creature explains in its unsettling voice that it has a favor to ask. Before the nature of that favor can be revealed, the story shifts once again. This time, the setting becomes Rufu Village. The atmosphere is completely different from the gloomy castle. The peaceful village bustles with ordinary daily life as Alba arrives while pulling a cart loaded with supplies. Upon reaching one of the local stores, he is warmly greeted by a young girl named IRL, the shop owner's daughter. The moment she sees him, she happily welcomes him and calls for her father. Inside the store, Alba begins unloading the products he has brought. He carefully explains that recovery scrolls, presence detection scrolls, detoxification scrolls, body strengthening scrolls, and lightning scrolls have all been prepared. In addition, he has brought assembled magic crystals required for operating the scrolls. He also notes that extra recovery scrolls have been included based on previous requests. Furthermore, The detoxification and body-strengthening scrolls have been improved to provide greater efficiency. The shop owner is overjoyed and declares that Alba is a savior for small villages like theirs. Since Rufu Village lacks facilities such as pharmacies and advanced magical services, the scrolls provide enormous value to the villagers. According to him, everyone will be delighted to receive the supplies. Alba humbly thanks him. However, the shop owner continues praising the quality of the products. Every scroll Alba delivers displays astonishing craftsmanship. The owner remarks that each one belongs to an entirely different league compared to ordinary goods found in city marketplaces. In his opinion, average magicians would never be capable of creating tools of such quality. Hearing this praise makes Alba smile. However, he immediately gives credit where it belongs. The remarkable craftsmanship comes from Lineria, and as her disciple, he simply feels proud to help distribute her creation. After finishing the delivery, Alba prepares to leave. Before he can depart, IRL approaches him carrying a flower. Holding it out toward him, she offers the gift. Confused, Alba asks why she is giving him flowers. IRL quickly explains that there is no special reason. The flower is called soiju, a species unique to the village. It is also known as the setting moon flower and is particularly popular among women. As Alba examines the flower, another village girl quietly whispers something from behind IRL. According to the teasing girl, the flower is also commonly given to someone special. The comment immediately causes IRL to panic. Her face turns red as she repeatedly tells Alba not to take the statement seriously. The teasing only grows worse. Embarrassed beyond endurance, IRL hurriedly explains that Alba has a teacher who teaches him how to create magical tools. Therefore, the flower should simply be viewed as a gesture of gratitude toward that teacher for always taking care of the village. After blurting out the explanation, she quickly runs away, loudly insisting that there is absolutely no other meaning behind it. Alba can only stand there in confusion. Nearby, the teasing girl watches the scene unfold with amusement and comments on how wonderful it is to be young. Despite her remarks, Alba reminds her that IRL specifically said there was no deeper meaning. The girl merely smiles before waving goodbye and telling him she will see him again next week. With the delivery completed, Alba places the flower alongside the groceries in his cart. Looking toward the road leading home, he quietly remarks that he should not keep his master waiting any longer. With that thought in mind, he begins the journey back toward the hilltop house where the clingy immortal witch awaits his return. After finishing his business in Rufu village, Alba begins making his way back home. The sun is already descending toward the horizon, painting the sky in warm shades of orange and gold. His cart is much lighter now that the scrolls and magical supplies have been delivered, while the groceries he purchased for the household gently rattle as he travels along the familiar road. Throughout the journey, his thoughts repeatedly drift toward the small house waiting for him on the hill. What was once simply a place to stay has gradually become something far more important. It has become a place where someone is waiting for his return. Eventually, the familiar house comes into view. Upon reaching the entrance, Alba opens the door and announces that he is back. Almost immediately, Lineria greets him with a bright smile and warmly welcomes him home. The sight causes him to freeze for a brief moment. Looking at her standing there waiting for him, a strange thought suddenly appears in his mind. He finds himself comparing the situation to a salaryman returning home after a long day of work only to be welcomed by his lovely wife. The image forms so naturally that it catches him completely off guard. Before he realizes it, his face begins turning red. Meanwhile, Lineria notices him standing there motionless and asks why he is spacing out. Embarrassed by the direction of his thoughts, Alba quickly avoids revealing the real reason and instead comments that he was simply thinking about how blissful the moment felt. Hearing that answer, Lineria remarks that she genuinely cannot understand him sometimes. However, the warm atmosphere lasts only a few seconds before Lineria immediately returns to her usual self. Rather than focusing on his comment, she loudly reminds him to hurry up and prepare dinner since she is already hungry. The romantic image Alba had imagined instantly shatters. The smile on his face slowly disappears as he silently takes back everything he had been thinking moments earlier. Instead of resembling a loving wife, she currently feels much more like a demanding child impatiently waiting to be fed. The realization leaves him sighing internally as he obediently agrees and begins unloading the supplies he brought home. Before heading toward the kitchen, however, he suddenly remembers the flower that IRL had given him earlier. Taking it from the cart, he walks over and offers it to Lineria as a souvenir. The unexpected gesture catches her completely off guard. For a moment, She simply stares at the flower in confusion as though she cannot understand why he is handing it to her. Seeing her reaction, Alba wonders whether she dislikes it. Lineria immediately hesitates before answering. She quickly assures him that she does not dislike it at all. The reason for her reaction is simply that she was surprised. After saying that, she gently accepts the flower from his hands. As she carefully examines it, her expression gradually softens. The delicate petals of the setting moon flower appear especially beautiful beneath the evening sunlight filtering through the windows. Holding the flower close, she quietly admires it for a few moments. Then a genuine smile appears on her face. She comments that it is incredibly pretty and sincerely thanks him for bringing it back for her. Alba responds that she is welcome. The exchange itself is simple, yet the atmosphere surrounding it feels unexpectedly warm. For a brief moment, neither of them says anything further. Lineria continues holding the flower while appreciating its beauty, and Alba finds himself strangely satisfied after seeing how happy the gift made her. As the evening progresses, Alba begins reflecting on the routine that has become a normal part of his life. The weekly delivery to Rufa village has now been completed once again. The trip to the village, the conversations with the townspeople, the return journey, and finally coming home to Lineria have all become familiar parts of his schedule. Thinking about it more carefully, he realizes just how much he has come to enjoy this lifestyle. His days are filled with magical lessons, household chores, deliveries, cooking meals, and countless strange interactions with his eccentric master. None of these activities are particularly grand or exciting, yet there is a comforting peace to them that he never experienced before. Not very long ago, he was a nameless person who viewed his own existence as empty and meaningless. He had no purpose, no destination, and no reason to continue moving forward. Now, however, things are different. He possesses a home. He possesses a purpose. More importantly, he possesses someone who waits for him whenever he returns. For this reason, he finds himself cherishing the quiet rhythm of his daily life. The relaxed days he spends with Lineria, the endless magical lectures, the meals they share together, and even her constant habit of interfering with everything he does have gradually become precious parts of his world. As he watches his master happily holding the flower he brought back, a gentle thought crosses his mind. He thinks that it would be nice if this peaceful daily life could continue forever. The idea feels comforting enough that he cannot help smiling slightly. At this point in time, he genuinely believes that nothing could be better than preserving these quiet days exactly as they are. At least, that is what Alba thinks. Unbeknownst to him, events beyond the safety of their hilltop home are already beginning to move, and the peaceful life he treasures so deeply may not remain unchanged forever. The story then shifts away from Alba's peaceful daily life and suddenly opens with him slowly regaining consciousness. His vision remains blurry at first, and his head feels unusually heavy. As he gradually opens his eyes, the first thing he sees is a teddy bear staring directly at him. The bear calmly asks whether he is finally awake. The unexpected sight startles Alba so badly that he immediately shouts in surprise. In his panic, he attempts to move, only to discover that his arms and legs are tightly bound by ropes. Realizing that he has somehow been restrained, he becomes even more alarmed and demands to know what is going on. Despite his shock, however, Alba forces himself to calm down. Rather than panicking completely, he begins assessing the situation in his mind. He recalls that he had been returning home from Rufa village after completing his usual deliveries and purchasing supplies. Everything had seemed normal during the journey. He had been taking the same route through the forest that he always uses. Then, without warning, an overwhelming feeling of drowsiness had suddenly washed over him. After that, his memories become completely blank. The realization immediately tells him that he was most likely captured somewhere along the road. The teddy bear then formally introduces itself and explains that its name is Dogma. It informs Alba that he is currently inside the castle where they reside. The bear also points toward two other teddy bears hiding nervously behind a nearby pillar and identifies them as Keen and Rainu. Alba stares at the bizarre scene unfolding before him and cannot help thinking that everything feels far too ridiculous to be real. From his perspective, being tied up and surrounded by talking teddy bears resembles something straight out of a dream. Unfortunately, Dogma immediately dismisses that possibility and informs him that this is not a dream at all. Dogma further explains that Alba is about to meet someone very important. For this reason, he advises him not to do anything strange. The bear casually adds that if Alba attempts to escape, his legs will simply be cut off. The matter-of-fact tone used to deliver such a horrifying warning only makes the situation feel even more unsettling. Before Alba can respond, Raimi suddenly emerges from behind the pillar and complains that they have already spent enough time talking to the bait. According to him, they should hurry up and deliver the human already. Raimi also comments that he is fairly certain their mistress does not actually eat humans, which only raises even more questions. He wonders aloud why that monster forced them to go through the trouble of kidnapping someone who appears completely useless except as potential food. The moment Alba hears the words monster and food, his anxiety immediately spikes. He loudly demands an explanation, but Dogma simply states that such matters are not their concern. According to him, their task is very simple. They were ordered to bring this human to their mistress and nothing more. Without waiting for further discussion, Dogma grabs Alba and begins dragging him across the floor. The journey through the castle is far from graceful. Alba is practically pulled along the ground as the teddy bears escort him through dark corridors and deeper into the structure. Eventually, they arrive in front of a large door. Raimi respectfully announces that they have brought the human. On the other side of the door waits the same terrifying monster seen earlier. A disturbing voice thanks them from within the room. The moment the monster opens its mouth, even the teddy bears appear frightened. Keen immediately orders the others to throw Alba inside and shut the door as quickly as possible. Dogma agrees without hesitation. Meanwhile, Alba continues shouting in confusion and demanding answers regarding what exactly is happening. Before leaving, however, Dogma unexpectedly turns toward him and politely asks him not to think badly of them. Alba barely has time to process those words before Keen releases the magical restraints binding his body. Dogma then bids him farewell. Moments later, the heavy door slams shut behind him. The sound echoes throughout the room, leaving Alba completely alone with the monster. For several seconds, he simply stands there staring at the closed door. He immediately rushes toward it and pounds against the surface in frustration. Unfortunately, it does not budge. Realizing that he has been locked inside, Alba slowly turns around. His thoughts immediately focus on the creature the teddy bears referred to as their mistress. If their words are correct, then she must be somewhere within this room. The moment he looks behind him, he finds himself face to face with the grotesque monster. The creature greets him with an eerie laugh before commenting that he has finally arrived. It then tells him that he should come closer. Alba instinctively freezes. Meanwhile, from the monster's perspective, an entirely different series of thoughts unfolds. The creature is fully aware of its own condition. It understands that its appearance, voice, and even its magical presence are all twisted by a powerful curse. For countless years, these very traits have filled people with terror and disgust. Anyone who approaches inevitably succumbs to fear. For this reason, the monster assumes that the frightened boy standing before her will be no different. Even so, she cannot help finding his behavior slightly amusing. Although Alba is clearly terrified, he still begins slowly moving forward. In her mind, she silently mocks him as a foolish boy. She assumes he is merely putting on a brave face and that sooner or later the curse will overwhelm him. She carefully watches him take another step, then another. She wonders how much longer he will be able to maintain the act. Normally, this would be the point where fear completely consumes a person's mind and forces them to collapse. Yet Alba continues advancing. One more step follows, then another. The monster gradually becomes surprised. Even after all this time, he continues approaching. Eventually, he reaches a distance close enough for conversation and awkwardly asks how much closer he is supposed to get. At that exact moment, something completely unexpected occurs. From Alba's perspective, the horrifying monster standing before him is not horrifying at all. Instead, he sees an ordinary young woman. A beautiful girl with a shocked expression and flushed cheeks appears where the terrifying monster should be. The unexpected reaction causes her to stumble backward. In her panic, she loses her footing and falls onto the floor. Alba immediately reacts with concern. Letting out a surprised sound, he instinctively reaches toward her. Meanwhile, the girl remains frozen. Within her mind, countless emotions begin surfacing. It has been an incredibly long time since she has heard someone speak to her in such a calm and ordinary voice. There is no terror, no screaming, and no desperate attempt to escape. Instead, Alba simply sounds concerned about her well-being. Before she can process the situation, Alba grabs her hand. Her eyes widen instantly. Without hesitation, he begins pulling her back to her feet while lightly scolding her for somehow managing to fall despite there being absolutely nothing around to trip over. After helping her stand, he lets out a small sigh as though her clumsiness is the real problem in the situation. The girl continues staring silently into his eyes. For a moment, the outside world seems to disappear. All of her attention focuses on the warmth of his hand. She finds herself wondering how many years have passed since she last touched another living person. Decades of loneliness flash through her mind. Throughout all that time, everyone who saw her either fled in terror or collapsed before they could get close enough to make contact. There had never been anyone who willingly approached her. Whether human or animal, every living creature instinctively avoided her. For this reason, she eventually accepted that such isolation was simply her fate. Yet this boy reached out without hesitation. As she continues feeling the warmth lingering in her hand, she realizes that she can barely remember what human touch felt like anymore. The simple act of being helped to her feet creates a far greater impact on her heart than Alba could ever imagine. In that moment, the warmth of his hand feels more precious than anything she has experienced in countless years. As the two remain standing inside the strange underground room, Lupinus finds herself unable to take her eyes off Alba. Deep within her heart, thoughts that she has not entertained for decades begin surfacing one after another. She reflects on her long and lonely life and realizes that there has never been anyone who willingly approached her. It does not matter whether they were humans or animals. The moment they sensed her presence or heard her cursed voice, they would immediately flee in terror. Throughout the course of her life, she received nothing but fear, rejection, and disgust from those around her. For this reason, she eventually stopped expecting anything from others. Over time, she simply accepted that she would always be alone and gradually gave up on the idea of speaking to people altogether. Originally, her intentions toward Alba had been completely different. Earlier, she had watched him from afar laughing happily beside the village girl. Seeing such an ordinary and cheerful expression had made her curious. She had thought it might be amusing to play a small prank on him and watch him become frightened. That was the only reason she had allowed herself to become interested in him. Yet the situation unfolding before her now is nothing like she imagined. Meanwhile, Alba remains completely unaware of the storm of emotions occurring inside her mind. Looking at her sitting on the floor, he comments that she is surprisingly clumsy and asks whether she can stand. Even while speaking, he continues holding her hand to help her maintain her balance. The simple gesture causes Lupinus's face to become increasingly red. Her cheeks turn bright crimson as she continues staring at the hand holding hers. Her gaze remains fixed there for so long that Alba eventually notices. Suddenly realizing that they are still holding hands, Alba gasps and immediately lets go. He hurriedly begins apologizing, worried that he may have done something inappropriate. He explains that he only wanted to help her up and insists that he did not mean anything strange by it. In his nervousness, he begins speaking rapidly. Attempting to distract himself from the awkward atmosphere, he starts explaining how he ended up here. He tells her that he had gone to the village to buy and sell supplies as usual. After finishing his business, he had started heading home through the forest. Then he suddenly became incredibly sleepy. The next thing he remembers is waking up inside this castle. However, Lupinus barely seems to hear any of it. Her eyes remain fixed on his hand. Eventually, Alba cannot ignore it any longer and asks why she keeps staring at it. Without answering, Lupinus suddenly reaches forward and grabs his hand again. The unexpected action startles him. He asks what exactly she is doing, but she still does not respond. Instead, she gently examines his hand as though it is some rare treasure. There is a strange affection in her eyes as she studies it. Then, for the first time, a soft and genuine smile appears on her face. Slowly, she brings his hand closer and presses it against her cheek. Alba's confusion immediately reaches new heights. He has absolutely no idea how to react. Meanwhile, Lupinus simply closes her eyes and continues rubbing her cheek against his hand as though savoring the warmth. To her, this simple human contact feels unbelievably precious. Alba awkwardly asks whether she could possibly let go of him for now, but she continues enjoying the sensation for several moments longer before finally releasing him. After some time passes, the atmosphere calms down considerably. Lupinus prepares tea and serves it to him as though they are ordinary guests sharing an ordinary conversation. Sitting together, she eagerly asks whether it tastes good. Alba takes a sip and, after thinking about it for a moment, honestly replies that it is merely so. Rather than becoming offended, Lupinus smiles brightly and says she is glad to hear that. The response only confuses Alba further. At this point, nothing about the situation makes sense anymore. Nevertheless, he decides to ask the most important question and inquires about what exactly this place is. Lupinus happily explains that it is an underground castle. She proudly adds that she personally created it herself. The statement is delivered with the confidence of someone expecting praise. Alba looks around once more and, considering the enormous scale of the structure surrounding them, admits that it is genuinely impressive. The compliment makes Lupinus visibly pleased. After a brief pause, Alba hesitantly points out that she seems to want something from him. The moment he says that, Lupinus's eyes begin sparkling. She enthusiastically confirms that he is correct. Introducing herself properly, she declares that her name is Lupinus Leslier. Then, with obvious excitement, she explains that she has a favor she wishes to ask of him. Before Alba can prepare himself, she suddenly grabs his hand once again. With sparkling eyes filled with anticipation, she practically begs him to become her friend. The request catches him completely off guard. For a moment, he simply stares at her in disbelief. Lupinus then asks for his name. After learning that he is called Alba, she immediately shortens it into a nickname and happily begins calling him Alchan. She then asks him to call her Luppy instead, explaining that she would not mind at all. Still trying to process everything, Alba asks why she specifically chose him. Luppy places a finger against her chin and cheerfully suggests that perhaps it is love at first sight. The answer nearly causes Alba to choke. He immediately attempts to calm the conversation down before it goes in a dangerous direction. Noticing his reaction, Lupinus suddenly becomes nervous. Her expression darkens as she quietly asks whether he does not want to be her friend. Alba hesitates. Unfortunately, that hesitation proves disastrous. Lupinus immediately holds her breath, her eyes begin filling with tears, and her body starts trembling. Within moments, she looks as though she is about to completely break down. Watching the dramatic transformation unfold before him, Alba panics. Unable to endure seeing her cry, he quickly announces that he will be her friend. The effect is immediate. The tears vanish instantly. Lupinus's sadness disappears as though it never existed in the first place. Her face lights up with joy as she asks whether he really means it. The next moment, she flashes a victory sign with her fingers and playfully winks. Watching the unbelievable speed of her emotional recovery, Alba can only wonder how things somehow ended up like this. While Alba finds himself trapped in an increasingly bizarre friendship with the mysterious witch beneath the castle, a completely different situation is unfolding elsewhere. Back at the house on the hill, Lineria sits quietly while staring at the clock. At first, she simply waits. Minute after minute passes, then another hour. As the sky grows darker, her expression gradually becomes colder. In her mind, she repeatedly recalls the promise she and Alba made. He was never supposed to break curfew. No matter where he went, he always returned home before it became too late. Yet tonight he has not returned. The realization causes irritation and worry to mix together inside her chest. Her eyes eventually drift toward the flower Alba had given her earlier that day. Only a few hours ago, she had happily accepted it. Now she stares at it in silence. The beautiful flower sitting inside the vase only reminds her that its owner is nowhere to be found. As her emotions continue building, magical energy unconsciously begins leaking from her body. The flower starts wilting. Its petals lose their beauty. Its vibrant appearance is ruined beneath the pressure of her magic. Staring at the damaged flower, Lineria finally loses her patience and angrily demands to know why Alba is not coming back. In a burst of frustration, she grabs the vase and throws it away. The vase crashes against the floor and fragments scatter throughout the room. Yet even after venting her anger, the uneasy feeling inside her heart refuses to disappear. For someone who constantly claims to be a great and magnificent witch, the emotion she is feeling now resembles simple panic. Clenching her fists, she rises from her seat. At this point, remaining inside the house is no longer an option. She has already made up her mind. As she heads toward the exit, her thoughts focus entirely on one person. Her eyes burn with determination and anger. In her heart, she makes a silent declaration. No matter where Alba has gone, she intends to find him. No matter who took him, she intends to bring him back. Moving forward into the darkness outside, Lineria's expression becomes frighteningly serious as a single thought echoes through her mind. Alba belongs at her side, and she has absolutely no intention of letting anyone take him away. Back inside the underground castle, Alba finds himself spending yet another day with Lupinus, and before he realizes it, the two are sitting across from each other playing a rather suspicious card game using the deck he previously summoned through magic. The game revolves around memory and matching cards, but despite repeated attempts, Alba continues suffering one crushing defeat after another. Lupinus happily places another card onto the table and proudly announces that she has completed yet another full set. With obvious satisfaction, she declares herself the winner once again. Alba immediately protests in frustration, wondering why he keeps losing no matter how many times they play. Lupinus casually explains that the answer is very simple. According to her, his memory is terrible. The brutally honest remark causes Alba to nearly cry as he complains that she never holds back when insulting him. After counting the results, he realizes that his total number of victories remains exactly 0. In contrast, Lupinus looks genuinely delighted. She admits that playing together has become incredibly fun. Seeing her smile so brightly causes Alba to smile as well. While looking at the cards scattered across the table, he reflects on how strange life has become. Ever since learning summoning magic from Lunaria, he has brought various objects from his original world into existence. He never imagined that a simple deck of playing cards from modern society would become one of the most useful things he had ever summoned. Eventually, Alba glances toward the window and realizes that a significant amount of time has already passed. The thought immediately reminds him of Lunaria. He explains that he should probably return home soon since his master will undoubtedly be worried if he stays away much longer. The moment those words leave his mouth, Lupinus's expression changes. She suggests that perhaps he should simply forget about his master altogether. Alba immediately rejects the idea and clarifies that this is precisely why he intends to head home. Unfortunately, the conversation takes a familiar turn. Lupinus suddenly holds her breath, her eyes begin watering, and she looks moments away from crying. Having already witnessed this tactic multiple times, Alba quickly gives in before the tears can fully appear. He reluctantly agrees to stay a little longer and continue playing with her. The instant he does, her mood improves dramatically. Meanwhile, far away from the castle, Lunaria continues searching desperately for her missing disciple. As she moves through the wilderness, her thoughts drift back to the events of 1 year earlier. She remembers her trip to the capital and the overwhelming loneliness that consumed her life during that period. Back then, she had little interaction with anyone. The closest thing she had to company was a corpse she occasionally encountered. It was not a person she could speak with. It smelled terrible and offered no companionship whatsoever. Yet even that corpse served as proof that people had once lived in this world. For that reason alone, it helped ease her loneliness ever so slightly. Then she remembers the moment everything changed. Among the countless lifeless sights she encountered, a hand suddenly reached upward seeking help. She remembers stopping in surprise before asking whether the person was still alive. That person had been Alba. As she recalls the memory, she sees herself kneeling beside the unconscious boy and examining him with magic. At the time, he had looked incredibly fragile, almost as though he might disappear at any moment. Yet despite his weak appearance, she could feel an astonishing warmth radiating from his life force. Looking back on that moment now, Lunaria realizes something important. Although she was the one who saved Alba physically, Alba had unknowingly saved her emotionally. After more than 100 years of loneliness and isolation, his appearance brought color back into her life. The memory causes her expression to soften for a brief moment. She remembers holding his face and feeling genuine happiness. Returning to the present, she continues walking while reflecting on what Alba means to her. In her mind, he has become far more than a disciple. He is her aspiration, the person who gave her life purpose once again. Even though he is the only person she has ever personally rescued, his disappearance feels as though he vanished into ashes right before her eyes. These thoughts gradually begin pushing her toward dangerous conclusions. She wonders whether she should have eliminated every possible factor that could have caused her to lose him. A particularly disturbing idea enters her mind as she considers whether she should have simply tied him up to prevent him from ever leaving. The realization immediately shocks her. She quickly shakes her head and tries to regain control of herself. She repeatedly reminds herself that she still possesses her sanity. Alba is part of her life now, and therefore she must not descend into madness. Even so, the fear inside her refuses to disappear. As she continues moving forward, a door suddenly appears behind her. The unexpected sound causes her to spin around immediately. For a brief moment, hope flashes across her face as she calls out Alba's name. Unfortunately, the figure standing there is not Alba at all. Instead, a strange creature emerges from the darkness. Its appearance is unsettling, and its voice produces heavy, distorted sounds that she cannot properly understand. The creature slowly advances toward her. At first, Lunaria warns it not to come any closer. Then an even darker thought surfaces. Looking at the creature reminds her of the corpse she once used to ward off loneliness. A bitter laugh escapes her lips as she thinks that perhaps she should have simply killed Alba herself rather than risk losing him. The moment that thought crosses her mind, her eyes widen in horror. She becomes terrified not of the creature before her, but of herself. Realizing how twisted her thoughts have become, she immediately turns and runs away. As tears begin forming in her eyes, she desperately repeats that she will not surrender to madness. While running through the forest, she breaks down and cries out Alba's name, wondering where in the world he has gone. Then, through her tears, she notices something unusual on the ground. Cart tracks. Following them with her eyes, she quickly searches the surrounding area. Moments later, she discovers Alba's abandoned cart lying nearby. The sight instantly confirms that something happened to him here. At the same time, back in the castle, Alba sits on Lupinus's bed while she sleeps peacefully nearby. Looking around the room, he wonders how exactly his life managed to reach this point. He knows he needs to return home somehow. Lenaria is almost certainly worried sick by now. As he quietly considers his options, Lupinus suddenly murmurs the word mom in her sleep. Hearing that causes Alba to pause. He begins thinking about her situation more seriously. Until now, he has mostly viewed her as a strange and clingy girl. However, the loneliness hidden beneath her behavior becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. Perhaps she is just as alone as Lenaria once was. Meanwhile, inside her dreams, Lupinus relives memories she has experienced countless times before. The dream centers around her mother. Ever since the day the curse changed her life, she has never been able to truly love anyone again. Every person who sees her becomes terrified. Everyone fears her. Everyone rejects her. Gradually, she becomes isolated from society and treated as a being the entire world despises. Even so, there was one person she believed would always understand her. Her mother. She remembers desperately wanting to see her and returning home in search of comfort. Instead, she is met with horror. In the dream, her mother looks at her and screams that she is a monster. Lupinus reaches out for help, hoping someone will take her hand. Nobody does. She cries while a monstrous shadow looms behind her. No matter how desperately she calls out, nobody answers. The memory eventually blends into the same painful conclusion it always reaches. From that day onward, it feels as though her voice never truly reaches anyone ever again. While Lupinus remains trapped inside that nightmare, Alba quietly slips out of the room. Upon opening the door, he immediately discovers the 3 teddy bears waiting outside. The bears are shocked to see him walking around perfectly fine. One of them immediately comments that Dogma apparently lost the bet since Alba is clearly still alive. Another remarks that he must have been nothing more than the monster's guest after all. The group begins talking among themselves in complete confusion. Alba listens for a moment before explaining that there was never any monster in the first place. According to him, only a normal girl lives inside the room. The teddy bears immediately react with disbelief. They whisper among themselves that the poor human must have finally lost his mind after spending so much time with that thing. Hearing them repeatedly refer to Lupinus as a monster irritates Alba. He asks what exactly about her makes her monstrous. The teddy bears become confused when he refers to her by name. They ask who Lupinus is supposed to be. Alba is shocked that they do not even know their own mistress's name. Dogma honestly admits that he has no idea who Alba is talking about. Eventually, Dogma asks whether Alba plans on leaving. Alba immediately asks whether he is finally allowed to go home. Dogma explains that it is not exactly permission. Rather, since the so-called monster is currently asleep, this is the perfect opportunity to escape. He even advises Alba to run somewhere far away where she will never be able to find him. The teddy bears explain that they simply want to avoid unnecessary trouble. Alba listens before quietly commenting that the girl is incredibly lonely. Dogma once again asks who he is talking about. Alba ultimately decides there is no point explaining. At that exact moment, inside her room, Lupinus suddenly awakens. The first words that leave her mouth are Alba's name. Panic immediately floods her heart. She jumps out of bed and rushes toward the door while calling out for him. As she searches the room, painful thoughts begin resurfacing. When she was young, people used to smile whenever they saw her. She was loved by everyone around her. However, during the last 100 years, not a single person has shown genuine concern for her well-being. Over time, she became accustomed to being feared, avoided, and ignored. Even so, deep down she never stopped hoping. The memory of Alba calling her a friend makes her chest ache. She wonders whether all of that had been a lie. Perhaps she truly is alone in the world after all. Unable to stop herself, she begins crying. Then, just as her despair reaches its peak, the door opens. Lupinus freezes. Standing there is Alba. In one hand, he carries a kettle. Looking at her tear-stained face, he immediately asks whether she is crying again and jokingly comments that she is quite the crybaby. Completely stunned, Lupinus can only stare. Alba then pours a drink and hands her a cup. He explains that it is honey lemon tea. According to him, it is a small thank you gift for the tea she served him earlier. He adds that it helps people relax when they are stressed. Lupinus slowly accepts the cup. The warmth radiating from it reaches her fingers. As she stares at it, her eyes begin filling with tears once more. Seeing this, Alba immediately asks why she is crying again. Lupinus honestly admits that she thought he was never coming back. Alba scratches his cheek awkwardly before reminding her that they are friends. He explains that besides his master, he does not really have many people he can talk to. For this reason, there is no way he would simply leave without saying anything. As he says this, he notices that Lupinus is somehow crying even harder than before. Confused, he asks why she is still crying. Through her tears, Lupinus explains that nobody has ever said anything like that to her before. The sincerity in her voice makes it clear that she means every word. Wanting to cheer her up, Alba extends his hand toward her. He gently tells her that if she keeps looking down, the tears will never stop. According to him, she needs to lift her head and face forward. Hearing those words, Lupinus does her best to smile despite the tears still running down her cheeks. With trembling fingers, she reaches out and places her hand in his. At that moment, as the distance between them finally disappears, a mysterious woman silently appears nearby and observes the scene unfolding before her, watching the strange friendship between the lonely witch and the boy who unknowingly changed her world. The warm atmosphere inside the castle is destroyed in an instant when a new presence suddenly appears before Alba and Lupinus. Both of them are startled by the unexpected arrival. Alba immediately recognizes the woman and hesitantly calls out, asking if she is Physalis. The woman calmly greets him and remarks that it has been a long time since they last met, adding that she missed him as well. Her casual attitude feels completely out of place considering the situation. Alba notices that Lupinus reacts very differently. The moment she sees Physalis, she quickly hides behind him as though seeking protection. Watching this, Physalis lets out a sigh and remarks that Lupinus is acting exactly the same as always. Tears begin forming in Lupinus's eyes, yet Physalis dismisses her crying as nothing more than noise. Confused by the entire situation, Alba asks why Physalis has come here. She casually explains that she has come to rescue him and comments that it must have been frightening being forced to spend time around a monster. The moment Alba hears the word monster, anger immediately appears on his face. At the same time, Lupinus timidly protests and argues that Physalis is actually the one who follows other people around. Physalis pays no attention to her response and coldly states that there is no point listening anyway since she cannot understand anything the creature says. To Physalis, Lupinus does not appear as a lonely young woman. Instead, all she sees is a horrifying monster standing behind Alba. Trying to understand this situation, Alba asks Lupinus whether she knows Physalis. Lupinus begins explaining that Physalis was one of her classmates long ago. However, before she can say anything further, Physalis suddenly swings her arm through the air and releases a powerful spell. Everything happens so quickly that neither Alba nor Lupinus has time to react. A violent burst of magic races toward them. Blood immediately splashes across the room as Lupinus is struck and thrown across the floor. Alba's eyes widen in horror. The cup she had been holding slips from her hand and crashes onto the ground, shattering into countless fragments. Physalis calmly comments that perhaps hunter and prey is a more accurate description of their relationship. Lupinus lies on the floor bleeding heavily as tears stream down her face. She cries out in pain and desperately calls for Alba. Hearing her voice, Alba immediately reaches out toward her. Lupinus reaches back, attempting to grab his hand. For a brief moment it seems as though they will connect. Then Alba notices something horrifying. Her hand is no longer attached to her body. The severed limb flies through the air before landing on the floor nearby. Blood pours from the wound where her arm was cut off. The sight leaves Alba completely stunned. His confusion rapidly transforms into fury. None of this makes any sense to him. Everything he has seen suggests that Lupinus is simply a lonely girl, yet Physalis continues calling her a monster and attacking her without mercy. Turning toward Physalis, Alba demands to know what she is doing. Physalis merely smiles and remarks that even after being covered in the monster's blood, he remains surprisingly calm. Her response only makes him angrier. Clenching his fists tightly, he shouts at her to stop talking nonsense and repeats his question. Then, unable to control himself any longer, he charges forward and throws a punch directly at her. Physalis casually blocks the attack with her palm. She comments that he has quite an interesting expression on his face before striking him back. Her fist crashes directly into his face, sending blood flying. Without giving him any opportunity to recover, she continues attacking. Blow after blow lands on Alba's body. Each strike carries overwhelming force. She coldly remarks that he should not act brave when he is this weak. Finally, one powerful punch sends him flying across the room. His body slams into the floor, and consciousness begins fading from him. Physalis observes him for a moment and remarks that he remains surprisingly quiet throughout the beating. After a short pause, she realizes the reason and laughs to herself. Alba is no longer responding because he has already passed out. With him no longer able to interfere, her attention shifts entirely back to Lupanus, the injured witch desperately drags herself across the floor while continuing to call Alba's name. She cannot properly see through her tears and blood, yet she refuses to stop searching for him. Eventually, her trembling hand grabs onto Physalis' clothing. The response is immediate. Physalis violently kicks her away. Lupanus cries out as she is thrown backward. Looking down at her, Physalis orders her not to touch her and calls her a filthy monster. The hatred in her voice is impossible to miss. Moments later, another magical slash cuts through the air and tears into Lupanus' body. Fresh blood spills onto the floor as another scream escapes her lips. Standing over her fallen former classmate, Physalis declares that her voice will never reach anyone. She claims that she alone understands the suffering hidden inside Lupanus' heart. Leaning closer, she whispers that she is the only person capable of hearing the screams buried within her soul. However, she immediately clarifies that understanding does not mean sympathy. A twisted smile spreads across her face as she admits that she feels no compassion whatsoever. Instead, she wants to hear Lupanus' voice of despair. Yet despite everything, despite the pain, the blood loss, and the fear, Lupanus continues repeating only one name. Again and again she calls for Alba. Nothing else leaves her lips. Watching this, Physalis grows irritated and remarks that even now Lupanus continues thinking about him. She tells her that she can stop talking because the situation is already over. A sinister magical formation suddenly appears around Lupanus. The atmosphere inside the room becomes much heavier. Physalis calmly explains that she intends to drain all of Lupanus' magical power. Activating a specialized spell known as power drainage, she begins extracting enormous amounts of magical energy from the weakened witch. As the spell takes effect, Lupanus' condition visibly worsens. Her body trembles uncontrollably while her magic is slowly devoured. Physalis watches the process with satisfaction. Once she confirms that the spell is functioning properly, she turns her gaze toward Alba's unconscious body. A grin slowly spreads across her face. She remarks that a magic eater must completely consume its target's magical power before the process can be completed. Since that means she has time to spare, she decides that waiting in silence would be boring. Looking toward Alba, she wonders aloud whether he can still hear her. Then, with complete confidence that victory already belongs to her, she suggests having a little conversation while the spell finishes its work. The grin on her face grows wider as Lupanus' magic continues draining away and an overwhelming sense of dread fills the room. As Lupanus continues lying helplessly on the ground while her magical power is steadily drained away, Physalis uses the opportunity to speak to Alba as though she is conducting a lecture rather than participating in a brutal battle. While Alba struggles to endure the pain from his injuries, she calmly explains that magic is fundamentally nothing more than a collection of character patterns, formulas, and structured magical information. According to her, no matter how magnificent or revolutionary a spell may be, it immediately loses much of its value the moment its structure becomes known to others. For this reason, magicians throughout history developed a technique known as internal magic circles. Instead of storing the final result of their life's research externally, they engrave the completed form directly into their own bodies, allowing their most precious achievements to remain protected from theft. However, Physalis argues that all of that effort ultimately becomes meaningless if a magician lacks the strength necessary to defend themselves. In her view, decades of research can be reduced to ashes in a single day if the owner is incapable of protecting what they have created. While she speaks, Alba continues shaking from pain and anger, yet Physalis shows not the slightest trace of sympathy. She remarks that magicians who dedicate their entire lives to research while neglecting their own strength are beyond hopeless. To her, such people are merely fools waiting to be robbed by someone stronger. Hearing those words while Lupinus suffers nearby fills Alba with rage. He tells her that he does not care about any of her theories. Using every ounce of strength he can gather, he forces himself back onto his feet and attempts to attack her once again. Physalis merely smiles at the sight. Turning toward him, she casually demonstrates another spell. She explains that the magic is called cut magic. By simply swinging her arm through the air, she can generate invisible slashing attacks capable of tearing through her opponents from a distance. She admits that the spell is one of her personal favorites due to its versatility and convenience. As she speaks, another slash races through the room and crashes into Alba, sending fresh pain throughout his already wounded body. She then begins describing the spell's origin as though she is discussing a pleasant memory. According to her, the magic once belonged to an elderly magician who spent her retirement living peacefully in a distant island nation far to the east. Physalis openly laughs as she recalls how the woman ultimately died from the shock of losing the treasured magic she had spent her life developing. The memory amuses her greatly, and she continues speaking while Alba grits his teeth in frustration. As the conversation continues, Alba suddenly notices something strange. Physalis's appearance begins changing before his eyes. The face he has been looking at until now gradually disappears, revealing an entirely different young woman underneath. Smiling proudly, she explains that her previous appearance was merely the result of replacement magic. Her true ability allows her to assume the faces and forms of people she remembers. According to her, it is an incredibly convenient spell. She casually reveals that the appearance she had been using belonged to a student from some insignificant town. She desired the student's magic, so she simply lured him out one night and stole it. With a mocking smile, she remarks that boys are surprisingly easy to deceive. Hearing this only fuels Alba's anger even further. Despite his injuries, he begins laughing. The laughter contains no amusement whatsoever. It is born entirely from disgust. He mocks her by pointing out that everything she boasts about has been stolen from somebody else. The comment immediately irritates Physalis. She argues that calling it theft demonstrates a complete failure to understand reality. According to her, Magic Eater merely transfers magic from one location to another. If someone loses their internal magic circle, that simply proves they were weak. Strength alone determines ownership. Furthermore, she proudly reminds Alba that she became known as the greatest magician in the world using nothing except this ability. In her eyes, all effort becomes meaningless when confronted by overwhelming power. The world itself is unfair, and she believes that reality should simply be accepted. Alba's expression hardens as he listens. Looking directly into her eyes, he calls her trash. He tells her that someone who survives entirely on the achievements of others can never understand the weight of genuine effort. He describes her as a spoiled child living off leftovers stolen from people who actually work for their accomplishments. For this reason, she has no right to speak about effort, talent, or hard work. Rather than becoming angry, Physalis appears amused. She comments that it is difficult to take him seriously while he is covered in blood and struggling to remain standing. Alba immediately shouts for her to shut up. To him, everything he has said is the truth. Physalis continues teasing him. She points out that he had remained mostly silent until now, making his sudden emotional outburst unexpectedly entertaining. Going even further, she jokingly suggests that perhaps he should become her servant. According to her, having someone like him around would probably be amusing. Alba instantly rejects the idea and tells her to save such ridiculous conversations for her dreams. He bluntly declares that she is the real idiot in the room. Physalis studies his expression carefully and claims that his thoughts are written all over his face. Then she casually presents a proposal. Turning toward the wounded Lupinus, she asks what Alba would do if she agreed to let the girl go. The moment those words leave her mouth, Alba's eyes widen. Physalis immediately notices his reaction and asks why he suddenly stopped moving. Clenching his fists tightly, Alba responds that she is misunderstanding him. The reason he hesitated is not hope. Rather, he is furious with himself for even considering listening to the person responsible for everything that has happened. He tells her that her pathetic attempt at negotiation only fills him with greater anger. Hearing this answer, Physalis simply shrugs and calmly announces that negotiations have failed. Without warning, she swings her arm. Another invisible slash tears through Alba's body. Blood sprays from the fresh wound as pain courses through him. Physalis coldly admits that she never intended to release Lupinus in the first place. Extracting the internal magic circle and obtaining the magical being creation magic comes first. Immediately afterward, she resumes casting Magic Eater on the helpless witch. Alba watches the scene unfold before his eyes. He watches Lupinus continue suffering. He watches her endure unimaginable pain while lying helplessly on the floor. He watches Physalis standing above her without the slightest trace of mercy. At that moment, a decision is made. Deep inside, Alba realizes that he never imagined he would be forced to use such a thing against another human being. Even now, he is not mentally prepared for what he is about to do. The thought of intentionally harming someone terrifies him. However, watching Lupinus continue suffering is even more unbearable. His determination finally overcomes his hesitation. Activating his summoning magic, he calls forth an object from his original world. A weapon appears in his hands. A gun. Physalis does not even notice it at first. The next instant, an explosive sound echoes throughout the room. A bullet tears through the air. Physalis's eyes widen in shock as blood erupts from her waist and the projectile punches through her body. For the first time since arriving, genuine surprise appears on her face. Alba immediately moves behind her while gripping the unfamiliar weapon with trembling hands. When Physalis turns around, she sees him aiming the gun directly at her. Unable to understand what she is looking at, she asks what exactly that strange iron pipe is supposed to be. She never receives an answer. Another deafening shot rings out. The second bullet strikes her directly in the head. Her body collapses onto the floor. Silence follows. For several moments, nothing moves. Alba simply stands there. His entire body trembles uncontrollably. His eyes remain fixed on the corpse lying before him. The reality of what just happened slowly begins sinking in. He realizes that he has taken a human life. The thought horrifies him. Falling to his knees, he begins crying. Looking at the body, he struggles to comprehend how fragile human life truly is. The fact that a person can die so easily leaves him shaken to his core. His hands refuse to stop trembling. For a brief moment, all he can do is stare and cry. Then he remembers Lupinus. Immediately wiping away his tears, he rushes toward her. The witch lies unconscious on the floor with a knife still embedded in her body. Carefully, Alba pulls it free. The action causes her to cry out in pain. Supporting her weakened body, he apologizes repeatedly and tells her that she must be suffering terribly. Lupinus weakly tries to say something. Alba lowers his head and asks what she is trying to tell him. Only a single word escapes her lips. She tells him to run. Alba freezes. Before he can ask what she means, something horrifying occurs behind him. The body he shot begins moving. Slowly and unnaturally, Physalis rises back to her feet. Alba's eyes widen in disbelief. The woman who should be dead is standing once more. Her movements are erratic and unstable. Her expression appears completely broken. With madness filling her eyes, she repeatedly mutters that she is no longer alive. According to her rambling words, she is already dead. Her body refuses to stop shaking. She staggers forward in an unstable manner while repeating the same statements over and over. Terror immediately grips Alba. Supporting the injured Lupinus, he begins dragging her away from the approaching magician. His voice trembles as he demands to know how she is still alive. Physalis barely seems capable of understanding the question. Looking at him with insanity burning in her eyes, she asks whether something like that even matters anymore. Blood continues running down her body as her broken form staggers forward. At that moment, Alba realizes that the battle is far from over and that the nightmare standing before him may have become something far more frightening than before. As Alba desperately supports Lupinus and struggles to drag her away from the horrifying figure advancing toward them, Physalis's mental state appears to deteriorate even further. Blood continues flowing from wounds that should have ended her life long ago, yet she remains standing as though refusing to acknowledge reality itself. Her body trembles violently while madness burns within her eyes. Staring directly at Alba, she declares that he is going to meet his end regardless of what he does. Since his fate is supposedly already decided, she questions why any of his efforts should matter. The moment those words leave her mouth, an enormous surge of magical power erupts from her body. The underground castle immediately begins trembling from top to bottom. Dust pours from the ceiling, cracks spread across the stone floor, and the very air seems to distort beneath the pressure of the overwhelming magic being released. Alba instinctively pulls Lupinus closer against his body. Although he desperately tries to remain calm, fear slowly creeps into his heart as the shaking grows increasingly violent. Physalis slowly extends her hand toward them while her expression becomes even more unstable. Countless flashes of light begin appearing around Alba and Lupanus, and the magical pressure becomes so overwhelming that breathing itself feels difficult. Convinced that a fatal attack is about to strike, Alba closes his eyes tightly and holds Lupanus even closer, preparing himself for the worst possible outcome. Then, at the very last moment, a familiar voice echoes throughout the room. Rather than sounding worried, the voice sounds mildly annoyed as it remarks that it is truly troublesome how much work its disciples always manage to create. The instant those words reach his ears, Alba's eyes snap open. For a brief moment he cannot believe what he is hearing. Then he sees her standing directly between them and Physalis. It is Lineria. The sight leaves him completely stunned. After everything that has happened, after all the fear, confusion, and despair he has endured since being kidnapped, his master has finally arrived. Relief floods through his entire body so suddenly that he nearly collapses on the spot. Meanwhile, Lineria calmly raises her staff as though the situation before her is nothing particularly unusual. The atmosphere immediately changes. Brilliant light fills the room while immense magical energy gathers around her. The sheer density of power radiating from her body surpasses anything Alba has witnessed before. Even the castle itself seems to react to her presence. Without hesitation, she begins casting a spell. The moment her magic activates, a tremendous shockwave erupts throughout the underground structure. A deafening roar echoes through the halls as the entire castle shakes even more violently than before. Physalis stares in complete disbelief. Her eyes widen as a section of the castle wall simply explodes outward under the force of Lineria's magic. Massive chunks of stone are blasted apart and sunlight pours through the newly created opening. The display of power is so overwhelming that even Physalis becomes momentarily speechless. Alba can do nothing except stare at his master in amazement. Meanwhile, Lineria finally turns her attention toward him. Rather than immediately asking whether he is injured, she asks an entirely different question. She wants to know exactly where he has been. Still struggling to process her arrival, Alba asks how she even managed to find him. Lineria responds without the slightest hesitation, stating that he is precisely 36 hours and 23 minutes late returning home. The answer catches Alba completely off guard. Faced with such an absurdly specific response, all he can do is offer an awkward apology. Lineria maintains a stern expression and admits that there are countless things she wishes to ask him later. However, before the conversation can continue, Alba hurriedly begins explaining the situation. While still supporting Lupanus, he tries to tell her about the injured girl in his arms. The moment Lineria notices the worried look on his face, she lets out a small sigh and tells him not to make such an expression. According to her assessment, the girl is still alive. Hearing those words immediately eases some of Alba's anxiety. Nearby, Lupanus weakly reacts to the sound of Lineria's voice. Despite her condition, she manages to whisper a few faint words. Lineria glances toward her and casually states that she will save her as well while she is here. She then asks Alba whether that is what he wants. Without a moment of hesitation, he immediately answers yes. Lineria accepts the request as though the answer was obvious from the beginning. After all, she explains that she could never reject a wish made by her adorable disciple. With complete confidence, she proudly declares herself to be the greatest, most magnificent, and most superior master in existence. A bright smile spreads across her face as she begins walking toward Physalis. The atmosphere instantly becomes tense once again. Physalis stares at the approaching witch and, despite her unstable condition, recognition flashes across her face. She remarks that Lineria used to be nothing more than a lonely woman whose only redeeming quality was studying magic. With obvious sarcasm, she wonders whether Lineria finally learned how to communicate properly after all these years. However, Lineria merely tilts her head in confusion. From her perspective, Physalis does not appear as a normal girl at all. Just as Physalis perceives Lupanus as a monster, Lineria sees something entirely different standing before her. The figure appears grotesque and distorted, while the words emerging from Physalis's mouth sound like meaningless noises rather than actual language. The story shifts slightly backward in time to the period before Lineria finally reunites with Alba. After painstakingly tracking his trail through the forest and following every clue she can find, the immortal witch eventually arrives at the entrance of the mysterious underground castle hidden deep within the wilderness. Standing before the ancient structure, she quietly confirms to herself that this must be the place where Alba is being held. A determined expression appears on her face as she thinks that she has finally found him. In her heart, She promises that she is coming to rescue him and that he simply needs to wait a little longer. Without allowing herself any hesitation, she steps through the entrance and begins advancing deeper into the dark and unfamiliar corridors of the castle. Elsewhere within the castle, the three teddy bears have already become aware of the approaching intruder. Unfortunately, the news causes considerable stress, particularly for Reimu. The small magical bear loudly complains that he has finally reached the limit of his patience. According to him, attempting to stop a witch who is actively storming the castle is an utterly ridiculous task. While he continues voicing his concerns, Dogma and Keen remain surprisingly calm. Rather than panicking, Dogma immediately begins discussing strategy as though everything is proceeding according to a carefully prepared plan. He explains that he will focus on launching mid-range attacks designed to restrain the intruder and limit her movements. Keen will provide logistical support and assist wherever necessary. After outlining those roles, Dogma casually adds that Reimu will strengthen both their offense and defense while simultaneously serving as the frontline decoy. The moment Reimu hears the word decoy, he completely loses his composure. He loudly demands to know why everyone is acting as though such an arrangement is perfectly reasonable. In his opinion, there is a tremendous difference between supporting allies from the rear and standing directly in front of an angry witch. He repeatedly questions why he is being assigned the most dangerous position while everyone else remains relatively safe. Dogma responds with complete seriousness and reminds him that they are magical beings created by their mistress. Since an invader has entered the castle, defending it is naturally their responsibility. Keen immediately agrees and tells Reimu to stop complaining so that they can focus on the battle ahead. However, Reimu refuses to calm down. Instead, he continues arguing that risking their lives to protect a monster makes absolutely no sense. He insists that things would be different if they were protecting an ordinary young girl, but their mistress is a witch who has transformed into something terrifying. For this reason, he questions why they should continue putting themselves in danger for her sake. While he continues ranting, Dogma and Keen suddenly become noticeably uncomfortable. Their expressions freeze completely as both bears begin staring at something behind him. Unfortunately, Reimu completely misunderstands the reason for their reaction. Believing that they are merely ignoring him again, he keeps talking without restraint. He declares that regardless of what anyone says, he intends to return to his room, eat cookies, and stay as far away from the approaching witch as possible. Meanwhile, Dogma and Keen continue staring silently. Their increasingly nervous expressions eventually catch Reimu's attention. Confused by their behavior, he asks why they are making such strange faces. The moment he turns around, he finally discovers the answer. Standing directly behind him is Lineria herself. For several long seconds, both parties simply stare at one another. Reimu's mind completely freezes as he struggles to process the fact that the witch somehow managed to appear right behind him without anyone noticing. Lineria calmly watches the tiny magical bear while he remains trapped in shock. Then she suddenly announces that she is an incredibly powerful witch and boldly challenges the monsters before her to come at her if they dare. The declaration immediately terrifies Reimu. At the same time, Lineria demands that they return Alba to her. If they refuse, she warns them that she will unleash terrifying magic upon every one of them. To make her intentions even clearer, she openly declares that she will beat them up if they continue standing in her way. The overwhelming confidence in her voice sends chills throughout Reimu's tiny body. As he stares at the witch, something unexpected begins happening inside his mind. His thoughts gradually drift away from the present situation and toward his own life. Looking back upon the years that have passed, he realizes just how empty his existence has been. More than a century has passed since he first came into existence. At some point, he stopped keeping track of the exact number entirely. The endless repetition of daily life slowly drained all excitement from his world. Every day follows the same routine. From morning until evening, he spends his time cleaning the castle, doing laundry, maintaining rooms, and completing countless other chores. The work never truly ends. Yet despite that monotony, there is one thing he always looks forward to: his mistress's homemade meals. For reasons he cannot fully explain, her cooking always fills him with a strange sense of warmth and comfort. Whenever he eats it, he experiences something that resembles genuine happiness. Even so, he has always sensed that there was once something more. Somewhere deep within the fading corners of his memory exists the vague recollection of an even greater reward. It is a feeling connected to distant days that he can barely remember anymore. A feeling capable of bringing tears of joy to someone's eyes. Then Lineria appears before him. The moment he sees her standing there, those forgotten emotions begin resurfacing. For some reason, the sight of the witch reminds him of those long-lost memories. Although she resembles a somewhat reclusive woman who has wandered into an abandoned castle, there is something strangely nostalgic about her presence. Deep within his heart, Raimi finds himself thinking that perhaps he has unconsciously worked hard all this time just to someday encounter someone like her. Meanwhile, Keen quietly comments that unlike their own mistress, this witch appears considerably more approachable. The observation immediately earns a response from Dogma. Rather than charging into battle, he suggests that they first determine whether she is someone they can communicate with. If she proves hostile, combat may become unavoidable. However, he believes negotiation should be attempted before resorting to violence. Keen agrees with the idea, although he cannot help mentioning that bringing Alba along probably would have made communication much easier. Dogma immediately points out that such a suggestion would have been far more useful if it had been made earlier. While the three bears continue discussing the situation, Lunaria experiences her own difficulties. Just as Physalis perceives Lupinus as a monster and Lupinus sees others differently due to the curse affecting her, Lunaria's own perception is also distorted. From her perspective, the three teddy bears appear as strange and unsettling monsters. Their voices sound warped and incomprehensible. No matter how carefully she listens, she cannot understand a single thing they are saying. This creates an incredibly frustrating situation. Although the creatures do not appear openly aggressive, they do not appear particularly friendly either. Lunaria quietly admits to herself that attacking someone becomes surprisingly difficult when she cannot determine whether they are hostile enemies or merely attempting to communicate. As she continues facing the three mysterious monsters standing before her, uncertainty briefly enters her thoughts. Nevertheless, despite that uncertainty, her determination remains completely unchanged. Alba is somewhere deeper within the castle, and regardless of how many obstacles stand in her way, she fully intends to find her disciple and bring him home. The scene continues inside the castle as Raimi suddenly falls into complete despair. After listening to Lunaria's words and witnessing her overwhelming presence, he quietly mutters that this must simply be fate. Unfortunately, neither Dogma nor Keen manages to understand what he says. They stare at him in confusion and wonder what he has just mumbled. Since they are too focused on the dangerous situation unfolding before them, neither of them pays proper attention. To them, Raimi merely looks strangely defeated, as though he has already accepted some unavoidable destiny. Then, without any warning whatsoever, Raimi suddenly makes a shocking announcement. Declaring that he has decided to become that person's underling, he immediately begins charging straight toward Lunaria. The sudden declaration leaves both Dogma and Keen completely stunned. Neither of them can understand how the conversation has reached such an absurd conclusion. While they remain frozen in confusion, Raimi continues sprinting toward the witch with complete determination. From Lunaria's perspective, however, the situation looks entirely different. Due to the curse affecting her perception, she sees a horrifying monster rushing directly at her. The sight instantly causes her eyes to widen in alarm. For a brief moment, she completely freezes. Then panic takes over. She loudly shouts for the creature not to come any closer before instinctively throwing a punch. Her fist crashes directly into Raimi's face, sending the unfortunate teddy bear flying backward. As he tumbles across the floor, Lunaria angrily complains that even though he is small, he is still disgusting. Tears begin forming in her eyes as she desperately begs the monsters to give Alba back. The emotional outburst leaves the remaining teddy bears staring at her in silence, unable to process what is happening. At that exact moment, a completely different sound echoes throughout the castle. A painful cry reverberates through the corridors. It is Luppy's voice. The anguished scream immediately captures everyone's attention. Even through the thick walls of the castle, the distress in her voice is unmistakable. Dogma instantly realizes something is terribly wrong and announces that something has happened to their mistress. Keen also becomes alarmed and asks what they should do. The atmosphere instantly changes as all thoughts of fighting are pushed aside by concern for Luppy's safety. Meanwhile, Lunaria senses something else hidden within that scream. She can feel an enormous stream of magical energy spreading through the castle. After examining it for a moment, she concludes that such power could never belong to Alba. Her disciple simply does not possess that level of magical capability. This realization causes her expression to grow serious. If the magical presence does not belong to Alba, then there must be another powerful magician somewhere inside the castle. The possibility immediately alarms her. As she analyzes the situation, a startling conclusion forms in her mind. There are already 3 witches involved in this incident. There is herself, the mysterious castle's mistress, and now another powerful witch whose magic she can sense. The complexity of the situation increases dramatically. After a moment of thought, Lineria turns toward Dogma and Keen. Looking directly at them, she points out that they are clearly worried about their mistress. If they truly want to save her, then they should take her to the source of that scream. She confidently states that Alba is also over there. Therefore, their interests currently align. Since they are all trying to reach the same location and save people important to them, cooperation is the most logical option. The two teddy bears exchange uncertain glances. Only moments earlier they had been preparing to defend the castle against her. Now she is proposing an alliance. Nevertheless, the urgency of the situation leaves little room for debate. After a brief moment of hesitation, they decide to trust her. Nodding their heads, they begin leading the way through the castle's corridors while informing her that she should follow them. Without wasting another second, Lineria immediately moves after them as the unlikely group rushes toward the source of the disturbance. Meanwhile, Raimi remains sprawled across the floor where Lineria's punch sent him. His vision gradually fades as consciousness slips away. While lying there, he reflects that everything after that point becomes a blur. He cannot remember exactly what happens next. However, he vaguely recalls that when he eventually regains awareness, his circumstances are very different from before. In fact, he ends up becoming a ghost. Exactly how that happens is a story for another time. For now, his consciousness fades completely as the others race deeper into the castle toward the unfolding crisis. From Lineria's perspective, the figure standing before her is not a human girl at all. Instead, she sees a grotesque monster whose mouth constantly moves while producing nothing but distorted and incomprehensible noises. The creature appears to be speaking endlessly, yet none of the words carry any meaning. Listening to the constant stream of unintelligible sounds, Lineria casually remarks that the monster is certainly a very loud talker. On the other side, Physalis becomes increasingly irritated and demands to know what is wrong with her. Despite possessing practical combat skills that, in her opinion, far exceed Lineria's own abilities, the witch standing before her continues acting with absolute confidence. Physalis cannot understand where such arrogance comes from. Meanwhile, Lineria pays little attention to the actual words being spoken. Deep in her heart, she has already reached her conclusion. Regardless of whatever excuses the monster might be trying to make, it injured Alba and nearly took his life. For this reason alone, she has no intention of forgiving it. Physalis continues shouting passionately, insisting that Alba attack first. According to her, everything happened due to a surprise attack. She argues that she did nothing wrong and that Alba resorted to a cowardly method when he shot her. She desperately tries to explain how terrifying it feels to experience death and insists that someone like Lineria should understand such fear. Unfortunately, all of those words reach Lineria as meaningless noises. After listening for a moment, Lineria casually remarks that the creature is probably attempting to make some kind of excuse. However, no matter what excuse it may have, there is one thing she absolutely refuses to accept. With frightening calmness in her voice, she declares that Alba is not the one who is allowed to die. Hearing that statement causes Physalis to laugh bitterly. She sarcastically asks whether that is really the conclusion Lineria has reached. In her eyes, Lineria is now standing in her way and even siding with the monster known as Lipanus. Confused by the monster's increasingly emotional noises, Lineria asks Alba if he can translate what it is saying. Alba awkwardly explains that Physalis is accusing her of siding with a monster and sounds extremely angry about it. The explanation causes Lineria to blink in confusion before commenting that the accusation is rather strange considering there is more than one monster present in the room. The moment Alba relays that response, Physalis' eyes widen with disbelief. Her face twists with fury as she clenches her fists tightly. Declaring that she will never forgive them, she vows to erase everything before her in a single overwhelming attack. She further insists that Alba will absolutely perish before this battle ends. As magical power begins gathering around her once more, Alba immediately starts panicking. Looking toward Lineria, he tearfully complains that she somehow managed to make the situation even worse than before. However, Lineria simply continues advancing without hesitation. She calmly states that forgiveness is no longer an option, even if the enemy were to cry and beg. The next moment, she launches her attack. The sheer force behind the spell terrifies Alba. Before he can even react, a hand suddenly grabs the back of his collar. Startled, he turns around and discovers that Lineria herself is holding him. Despite actively exchanging attacks with Physalis, she effortlessly drags him along as she moves throughout the battlefield. Both Alba and Physalis stare in shock at the unbelievable sight. Physalis immediately retaliates by launching her own attack, but Lineria dodges while continuing to carry Alba as though he weighs nothing at all. To Alba, it feels less like a battle and more like being swung around the room by a natural disaster. Physalis grows increasingly frustrated and demands to know whether Lineria has cast enhancement magic on herself. Meanwhile, Lineria finally lands on the floor and sets Alba down safely. Alba lets out a huge sigh of relief before excitedly praising his master. However, he also admits that, as a boy, being carried around like a princess is extremely embarrassing. The comment causes Lineria to let out a surprised noise before casually pointing out that being treated like royalty is not such a bad thing. Alba immediately replies that this is precisely why it feels embarrassing. Watching the two of them casually chat in the middle of a life-or-death battle causes Physalis' frustration to reach entirely new heights. Her fists tremble with anger as she demands to know what they think they are doing. In her eyes, they appear to be flirting in the middle of combat. Before Alba can respond, he suddenly notices another attack approaching and hurriedly warns Lineria. Physalis, however, reveals that the attack's true target is not them. Instead, the magical slash tears through a nearby table. The furniture explodes into pieces, causing Alba's eyes to widen in horror. Hidden behind that table is Lupinus. Realizing the true objective, Lineria immediately abandons her position and rushes forward. Another attack follows immediately afterward. A violent explosion erupts throughout the room. Smoke fills the air, completely obscuring the battlefield. Seeing the blast engulf both Lineria and Lupinus, Alba screams in panic and calls out for them. Physalis smiles confidently, believing her strategy has succeeded. However, as the smoke gradually begins clearing away, a brilliant flash suddenly appears. The sight causes Physalis' eyes to widen in disbelief. Emerging from the smoke is Lineria. Not only is she still standing, but she successfully protected Lupinus while simultaneously countering the incoming attacks. Even Physalis is forced to admit that the maneuver was unexpectedly clever. Alba immediately notices blood running down Lineria's arm and cries out in alarm. Looking at the wound, Lineria simply laughs and tells him not to make such a miserable face over a small scratch. Physalis responds with mocking laughter of her own. She remarks that Lineria is certainly putting on an impressive performance in front of her disciple. Yet despite her mockery, the distorted and frightening voice still echoes within Lineria's ears. For a brief moment, uncertainty enters Lineria's thoughts. Escape seems impossible. The enemy is powerful. Most importantly, she must protect both Alba and Lupinus at the same time. Sensing that hesitation, Physalis immediately seizes the opportunity. She comments that all of Lineria's negative emotions are practically leaking into the open. According to her, Lineria is not nearly as impressive as she pretends to be. The remark instantly enrages both Alba and Lineria. Alba immediately shouts back, demanding to know how she dares speak that way. He loudly insists that there is absolutely no chance his master could lose to someone like her. In his eyes, Lineria is amazing. Furthermore, he argues that people who constantly boast about their own superiority are usually the ones destined to lose. The declaration echoes throughout the room. Lineria turns toward him and watches his passionate defense in silence. Slowly, a gentle smile appears on her face. Physalis can only stare in confusion. Then she dismissively points out that the person making such bold statements is still the same helpless individual who constantly needs protection. The insult only makes Alba angrier. Before he can continue arguing, Lineria gently places a hand on his shoulder. She calmly tells him not to listen to the nonsense coming from the monster. According to her, the only thing that matters is whether he believes in her. She reminds him that fighting has always been his master's specialty. Curious, Alba asks what his own specialty is supposed to be. After thinking for a moment, Lineria casually answers that his role is being protected. Alba immediately shouts in disbelief, demanding to know what kind of specialty that is. Lineria merely laughs. Then her expression softens. With complete confidence, she tells him not to worry. Even if the entire world were to stand against her, she still would not lose. Before she can finish her dramatic statement, Alba immediately interrupts by calling out to her. Their eyes meet, and both of them smile. Lineria assures him that she will definitely grant his wish. Therefore, all he needs to do is believe in her. Tears begin forming in Alba's eyes as he excitedly declares that her speech was incredibly cool. Lineria beams with pride and asks whether it really sounded that impressive. Alba enthusiastically confirms it. Delighted by the praise, Lineria happily demands even more compliments. While the two continue their strangely normal conversation, Physalis remains standing nearby, completely unable to understand what she is witnessing. She notices that she can no longer hear the overwhelming sorrow and anxiety that had previously surrounded Lineria. Somehow, after only a few words exchanged with Alba, those emotions seem to have vanished entirely. The realization frustrates her even more. She begins wondering how a cursed witch can continue laughing so foolishly despite everything. Alba immediately reacts to those words and asks what she means by calling Lineria a cursed witch. However, Physalis is already descending deeper into madness. Grabbing her own head, she begins scratching at it violently while ranting incoherently. She cannot understand why she alone continues suffering. In her mind, that suffering should have been shared equally among all 13 of them. The more she thinks about it, the more unstable she becomes. Her voice grows louder, her eyes become increasingly frantic, and the magical energy surrounding her begins spiraling out of control once again, signaling that the battle is about to become even more dangerous than before. As Physalis's anger continues spiraling out of control, the magical energy surrounding her becomes increasingly violent. The air itself trembles while enormous amounts of mana gather around her body, causing the ruined chamber to shake under the pressure. With madness burning in her eyes, she begins constructing a spell far larger than any attack she has launched previously. As the magical power continues swelling, she repeatedly insists that things have to be this way and that there is no other possible outcome. Seeing the terrifying amount of energy condensing before them, Alba immediately realizes that an enormous attack is coming. Panic appears on his face as he hurriedly turns toward Lineria and begs her to use that impressive technique from earlier, the one that completely overwhelmed the battlefield and blasted apart the castle wall. To his surprise, Lineria casually replies that such a thing is impossible now. The answer immediately catches him off guard. Looking between her and the gigantic spell forming ahead, he asks whether she is serious. Lineria calmly explains that the effects of the potion she drank earlier have finally worn off. Hearing that, Alba suddenly realizes something he had completely overlooked. He quickly asks whether she had used a magic amplification potion before entering the castle. Lineria casually confirms that she drank one immediately before charging into the underground fortress. She further explains that blocking attacks on the scale of Physalis's magic consumes an absurd amount of power. According to her, dodging is 100 times more efficient than trying to stop such attacks head-on. Alba nearly loses his composure after hearing that explanation. He immediately demands to know what happened to all the confidence she displayed earlier. Furthermore, if blocking powerful attacks is so inefficient, then why did she keep protecting everyone instead of avoiding them? Rather than offering a practical answer, Lineria simply smiles and asks whether it did not look incredibly cool. Alba stares at her in utter disbelief. Tears nearly form in his eyes as he repeats the word cool in complete despair. Lineria happily elaborates that making a dramatic entrance at exactly the right moment, blocking a devastating spell, and rescuing her disciple after he managed to land himself in trouble is one of the coolest things imaginable. The horrifying possibility suddenly strikes Alba. He asks whether she really risked everything merely to create an impressive scene. Lineria immediately brightens and asks whether it truly looked that cool. At that point, Alba feels like crying. He hurriedly admits that it was extremely cool. In fact, it was so cool that he nearly got himself killed watching it happen. For this reason, he desperately begs her to demonstrate that overwhelming power one more time. Lineria blushes slightly at the praise but honestly admits that she cannot do it now. Despite saying that, she still asks him to praise her a little more. Alba can only stare at her, wondering what exactly is going through her head. Refusing to accept reality, he asks whether she is secretly holding back some reserved magical power. Hope sparkles in his eyes while he waits for confirmation. Unfortunately, Lineria immediately crushes that hope. With a completely serious expression, she flatly states that she has none. The seriousness of her face instantly tells Alba that she is not joking. Lineria then explains that she already spends an enormous amount of magical power every day maintaining the barrier around their home. For this reason, there is a limit to how much power she can freely use. Looking back on her recent actions, she casually admits that she may have overdone things a little simply to show off. Hearing those words leaves Alba speechless. Deep inside, he cannot believe that she openly admits risking so much merely for appearances. Yet before he can continue questioning her judgment, Lineria reminds him that she already told him something important earlier. Before Alba can ask what she means, Physalis suddenly interrupts. Her enormous spell finally reaches completion. The room shakes violently as she raises her arm and announces that she is finished waiting. Declaring that she will blast them all apart with her ultimate magic, she swings her arm forward. The massive attack immediately surges toward its target. The pressure generated by the spell causes the surrounding walls to crack even further, while the floor beneath them groans under the strain. Alba can only stare in horror as the devastating magic races toward them. At that exact moment, however, something unexpected happens. The door to the chamber suddenly bursts open. Standing in the doorway is Dogma. The small teddy bear is holding a strange weapon and appears to have rushed there with everything he has. Physalis barely acknowledges his presence. In her mind, victory has already been decided. However, Dogma acts before she can finish releasing the attack. Launching his own strike at precisely the right moment, he targets her arm. The instant his attack connects, Physalis's arm breaks apart midway through the spell's release. The interruption completely disrupts the flow of magic. Lineria and Alba immediately become alert as the unstable spell begins collapsing in on itself. A tremendous explosion erupts throughout the room. The partially completed attack detonates uncontrollably, sending shockwaves through the castle and shattering even more of the surrounding walls. Stone fragments fly in every direction while dust and debris fill the chamber. For several tense moments, visibility disappears entirely beneath smoke and rubble. When the chaos finally begins settling, Lineria lets out a long sigh of relief. Dogma also relaxes slightly before commenting that it seems he somehow managed to arrive just in time. Lineria readily agrees and admits that the situation was far closer than she would have liked. She even remarks that the blast came so close that it nearly scorched her hat. Meanwhile, Alba remains frozen in shock. Looking between Dogma and Lineria, he struggles to process what just happened. Questions immediately begin flooding his mind. Why did Dogma help them? Why did he suddenly intervene against Physalis? Before he can ask anything, movement catches his attention nearby. The remains of the shattered table suddenly shift. Alba immediately turns toward the sound. Something beneath the wreckage begins pushing upward. His eyes widen as broken pieces of wood slowly slide aside. Then a familiar figure emerges from underneath. Lupinus. Despite the terrible injuries she suffered and despite having so much magical power drained from her body, she somehow manages to stand once again. The sight leaves Alba completely stunned. For a moment, he can hardly believe what he is seeing. Then relief overwhelms him, and he shouts her name. His voice echoes throughout the ruined chamber as everyone's attention shifts toward the girl who has somehow found the strength to rise back to her feet. Physalis witnesses the scene unfolding before her and completely loses what little composure she still possesses. The sight of Alba and Lupinus reuniting fills her with overwhelming frustration and rage. Her eyes widen as she watches them, and a furious scream escapes her lips. She repeatedly demands to know why, unable to accept what she is seeing. Meanwhile, Lupinus's exhausted body finally gives out. The moment she sees Alba clearly, she stumbles forward and collapses directly into his arms. Alba immediately shouts her name in alarm, afraid that her condition may have worsened. However, Lupinus slowly lifts her head and gazes into his face. Tears begin gathering in her eyes as she softly calls out to him. She repeatedly confirms that it is really him standing before her. A bright smile spreads across her face as she looks into his eyes. For a moment, she simply seems relieved that he is safe. Alba cannot help blushing slightly under her gaze. Before the emotional reunion can continue, Keen suddenly steps forward and interrupts them. He points out that Lupinus's arm has only just been reattached and reminds her that she should not be moving around so recklessly. Furthermore, her magical reserves are nearly depleted after everything that has happened. As he speaks, he begins casting recovery magic on her weakened body. The healing light gradually surrounds Lupinus, helping stabilize her condition. Soon afterward, Dogma approaches from behind and explains that Keen specializes in recovery magic. Hearing this finally allows Alba to relax slightly. Looking toward Dogma, he sincerely thanks him for saving them. At the same time, he cannot help wondering how Dogma ended up working together with Lineria. Curious, he asks whether the two of them know each other. Dogma casually explains that their interests simply happened to align. Lineria immediately clarifies that they only met after she entered the castle and that they did not know one another beforehand. While this conversation continues, Lupinus gradually regains consciousness once again. The very first thing she does after opening her eyes is wrap her arms tightly around Alba. She clings to him with all the strength she can muster as tears begin streaming down her face. She repeatedly expresses how relieved she is that he is safe. Alba becomes increasingly confused by the intensity of her reaction, though he does not push her away. Nearby, Lineria watches the entire exchange with a puzzled expression, clearly wondering what exactly is happening between the two of them. Unfortunately, the brief moment of peace only serves to make Physalis even more furious. Watching Alba and Lupinus smiling together feels unbearable to her. Her entire body trembles as she stares at them. She begins screaming once more, demanding to know why they alone are able to enjoy such happiness. In her mind, none of it makes sense. The curse should have prevented something like this from happening. They are witches just like her, and yet they are laughing, smiling, and finding comfort in one another. To Physalis, the sight feels completely unfair. The more she thinks about it, the more unforgivable it becomes. Her hatred and jealousy continue growing until they completely overwhelm her remaining reason. Driven by those emotions, she forces herself back onto her feet and begins channeling magic once more. Her expression becomes twisted with rage as she repeatedly declares that she will never forgive them. Magical energy erupts throughout the room. A violent explosion follows, and thick fog rapidly spreads outward from the center of the chamber. Within moments, the mist engulfs everything. The visibility throughout the room drops dramatically as the fog expands in every direction. Lupinus immediately notices something strange happening to her body. As the magical mist surrounds her, her form begins fading into it. Panic appears on her face as she cries out Alba's name. Alba instantly reaches toward her and desperately calls her name in return, but the fog continues swallowing her from view. Seeing his reaction, Lineria quickly tells him not to panic. She calmly analyzes the situation and concludes that the spell appears to be fairly advanced. For this reason, Physalis should not be capable of maintaining many additional spells simultaneously. According to Lineria, the moment Physalis reveals herself again, she intends to finish the battle with a decisive attack. Even so, Alba remains visibly worried about Lupinus. Sensing his concern, Lineria reassures him that she will protect him no matter what happens. Gradually, the fog begins thinning. As visibility slowly returns, everyone prepares themselves for whatever Physalis is planning next. Then the mist clears enough to reveal something completely unexpected. Standing beside Alba is another Alba. For several seconds, complete silence fills the room. Every person present stares in shock. Lupinus's eyes widen as she looks back and forth between the two identical figures. She nervously points out that there are now two Albas standing before her. Lineria also appears confused by the situation. Meanwhile, the real Alba immediately realizes what has happened. His expression darkens as he understands that this must be another one of Physalis's tricks. The situation is far worse than a direct attack. If nobody can identify the real Alba, then confusion alone could destroy their advantage. Both Albas immediately begin claiming to be the genuine one. The room instantly erupts into chaos. Lupinus and Lineria both struggle to determine which one is authentic. Neither of them can afford to make a mistake. If they attack the wrong target, the consequences could be disastrous. The two identical Albas continue arguing, each insisting that the other is the fake. The confusion only grows more severe with every passing second. Suddenly, Lineria raises her hand and begins gathering magic. Before she can release the spell, Lupinus quickly stops her. Trembling with anxiety, she points out that they still do not know which Alba is real. One wrong attack could hit the genuine one instead. Hearing this, both Albas react immediately. One of them desperately shouts that he is not the fake. The urgency in his voice echoes throughout the room. Lineria remains silent. Rather than responding, she simply continues staring at them. Then, without hesitation, she unleashes her magic. A powerful attack shoots forward and pierces straight through one of the Albas. Lupinus freezes in horror. The struck Alba looks toward Lineria in complete disbelief and demands to know how she identified him. Instead of answering immediately, Lineria simply continues watching him with calm eyes. From her perspective, the truth had always been obvious. Due to the curse affecting her senses, the fake Alba never appeared as Alba at all. While everyone else saw two identical boys, Lineria saw something entirely different. One of them appeared as Alba. The other appeared as a grotesque monster attempting to imitate him. For this reason, there was never any confusion. The fake Alba collapses onto the ground. As his form begins breaking apart, the illusion disappears. At the same moment, Physalis's body falls nearby as well. For a brief moment after Physalis collapses, complete silence fills the room. The tension of the battle still hangs heavily in the air as everyone watches the fallen witch. Dust drifts through the damaged chamber while pieces of broken stone continue falling from the shattered walls. Alba is the first to speak. Looking toward Lineria, he hesitantly asks whether Physalis is finally dead. Lineria immediately tells him that she is not. She explains that there is no reliable method of truly killing Physalis in this world. According to her, Physalis is immortal. The answer leaves Alba completely stunned. His eyes widen in disbelief as he repeats the word in his mind. Lineria continues explaining that a curse has been cast upon Physalis. Whenever her heart stops beating, her magic automatically activates and completely restores her body. No matter how severe the injury may be, the curse drags her back from death. For this reason, Lineria deliberately avoids delivering a fatal strike. Instead, she chooses a blow that incapacitates her long enough to buy them time before the curse revives her. As Alba listens, an uneasy thought begins forming in his mind. If what Physalis said earlier is true, then would Lineria, who is also a witch, be suffering under the same curse? The possibility disturbs him greatly. Before he can ask, however, Lineria states that they need to leave immediately. She explains that Physalis's magical power has been almost completely exhausted. Therefore, now is their best opportunity to escape before she recovers. Alba instinctively agrees, but before he can take a single step, Lupinus suddenly rushes toward him. Looking up at him with anxious eyes, she asks whether he is really leaving. Alba freezes. He understands that they need to get away from this dangerous place, yet the moment he sees Lupinus's expression, another question fills his mind. If they leave now, what will happen to her? While Alba struggles with those thoughts, he notices something unusual. Lineria's expression suddenly changes. The calm confidence she displayed during the battle disappears entirely. Instead, she stands there glaring at Lupinus with visible anger. In a sharp voice, she tells Lupinus not to mess with her. She demands to know whether Lupinus has any idea what Alba has been through. According to Lineria, there is no possible way she could understand. Lupinus has always been the sort of girl who cries until somebody comes to save her. The harsh criticism immediately frightens Lupinus. She lowers her head and begins trembling. Nearby, Keen quietly remarks to Dogma that Lineria somehow seems capable of speaking normally to their mistress despite the curse. Dogma watches the interaction for a moment before commenting that Alba and his master truly are alike. In his opinion, the disciple and master are practically two peas in a pod. Lineria continues without softening her tone. She states that she has absolutely no obligation or reason to help someone who put Alba in danger. The only reason she is allowing Lupinus to live is that Alba would dislike it if something happened to her. Hearing those words causes tears to gather in Lupinus's eyes. Before she can respond, Dogma slowly steps forward. In a calm voice, he tells her that Lineria is ultimately correct. He explains that she should return to the life she used to live. Had Lineria not arrived, she might have suffered an even crueler fate than the one she narrowly escaped. The words hit Lupinus hard. Suddenly, she cries out. She loudly declares that she does not want that. The emotional force behind her voice surprises everyone in the room. Even the castle itself seems to tremble slightly in response. Lineria immediately asks what exactly she means. Lupinus clenches her fists. Her voice shakes as she finally admits the truth. She does not want Alba to be taken away from her. The confession echoes throughout the chamber. Lineria's expression hardens once again. Magical energy immediately begins gathering around her hand. The atmosphere turns dangerous. Looking directly at Lupinus, she asks whether she wants to die right there and then. The threat causes everyone present to tense up. Lupinus immediately protests and demands to know what Lineria thinks she is doing. Before the argument can escalate any further, Alba suddenly steps between them. Positioning himself directly in front of Lupinus, he raises his hands and asks his master to stop. He explains that although this place is dangerous, he cannot bring himself to leave a friend behind in a place like this. The moment those words leave his mouth, Lupinus's eyes fill with tears. Hearing Alba openly call her his friend affects her more deeply than anything else that has happened. Lineria notices her reaction and falls silent. After several moments, the magical energy surrounding her hand finally disappears. The tension in the room eases considerably. Looking at Alba, she comments that she never realized he was so soft-hearted. Alba smiles awkwardly and explains that he simply wants to be an ally to people who need help. Then he adds that this includes his master as well. The unexpected remark catches Lineria completely off guard. A faint blush appears on her face. Trying to hide her embarrassment, she begins twirling a strand of hair around her finger while awkwardly admitting that she supposes that is true. Meanwhile, Lupinus can no longer hold back her emotion. She immediately throws her arms around Alba and hugs him tightly. Tears continue streaming down her cheeks as she repeatedly calls his name. Alba smiles gently and begins patting her head in an attempt to calm her down. The touching scene lasts only a few moments before Lineria interrupts. She points out that Lupinus's habit of hiding behind other people has not changed at all. Peeking out from behind Alba, Lupinus immediately argues back. She insists that Alba is not just some random person. He is her friend. The statement instantly irritates Lineria. Almost without thinking, she shouts back that Alba is her disciple. The two girls immediately begin glaring at each other again. Standing directly between them, Alba can only sigh internally and wish they would stop fighting while he is caught in the middle. Fortunately, Dogma chooses that exact moment to change the subject. Casually stepping forward, he asks whether it would be acceptable for the teddy bears to accompany them as well. Keen quickly raises his hand and adds that he would like to come too. The unexpected request surprises Alba slightly. Before he can properly answer, Lineria simply announces that it is time to leave. Physalis could revive at any moment, and remaining inside the castle is far too dangerous. Alba looks around one final time before smiling softly. Then he turns around and begins following after his master. Lupinus quickly follows close behind him, while Dogma and Keen prepare to accompany them as well. Although countless questions remain unanswered and many challenges still await them in the future, Alba quietly feels that things might somehow work out. After all, for the first time since arriving at the underground castle, he is no longer facing everything alone. Just when it seems that the battle has finally come to an end and everyone is preparing to leave the ruined underground castle behind, Physalis once again begins moving. Despite the devastating injuries covering her body and despite having already been defeated multiple times, she stubbornly forces herself upward from the ground. Her gaze remains fixed on the others. As she watches Alba, Lupinus, and Lineria together, she cannot understand what she is seeing. Even though both Lupinus and Lineria are cursed witches just like her, they are still capable of smiling. They are still capable of trusting others and showing warmth toward one another. The sight deeply unsettles her. In her mind, such expressions should no longer exist for people burdened by the same curse. As the group begins preparing to leave, Physalis suddenly rushes forward again. Her eyes burn with frustration as she insists that the only reason the others can still smile is that they are fools who refuse to think about the consequences of their action. However, before she can reach them, she notices the severe wound around her waist. The damage is far greater than she initially expected. Realizing that it will take time before her body reaches the point where collapse and revival can fully restore her, she pauses for a brief moment. Then a sinister smile slowly spreads across her face. Without warning, her body collapses onto the ground. The others stare in confusion. Physalis lies motionless for only a moment before her thoughts begin racing. She reminds herself not to forget. As long as they remain witches, the hatred they carry will continue for eternity. The curse binding them all will never simply disappear. Suddenly, she rises again with a knife tightly gripped in her hand. A dark thought dominates her mind. She wonders whether striking down Alba directly in front of the other witches would finally force them to remember what they truly are. She believes that witnessing such a tragedy would strip away their smiles and remind them that they are cursed beings destined to suffer forever. Before she can act, Lineria notices her movement, the experience which immediately turns around. At that exact moment, Physalis lunges forward. In her mind, she imagines the others crying, screaming, and descending into despair. However, Lineria reacts instantly. She throws herself between Alba and the incoming attack while simultaneously pushing her disciple out of harm's way. The knife strikes her directly in the chest. Blood immediately spills from Lineria's mouth. Alba's eyes widen in horror. Nearby, Lupinus freezes as panic and disbelief fill her expression. Lineria staggers slightly but remains standing. Without hesitation, Lupinus rushes forward toward Physalis. However, before anyone can interfere, Physalis suddenly grabs Lineria by the hair and violently pulls her upright. Blood continues dripping from Lineria's lips as Physalis holds her captive. Looking directly toward Alba and Lupinus, Lineria firmly orders them not to move. Both of them stop immediately, their expressions filled with fear and helplessness. Physalis lifts Lineria's head higher and begins speaking. Lineria coldly observes that Physalis has recovered far too quickly. In response, Physalis calmly explains that such a thing should be natural for witches like them. Since their bodies can completely regenerate after being brought down, many witches eventually develop methods that allow them to force a revival whenever necessary. To her, self-destruction has simply become another tool. The explanation only makes Alba angrier. His entire body trembles. Unable to endure the sight any longer, he lowers his head and desperately begs her not to harm his master any further. Beside him, Lupinus begins crying as well. Neither of them can bear watching Lineria continue suffering. Physalis merely stares at them. She tells Alba that he still does not understand the reality of the situation. She points out that Lineria and Lupinus are both immortal witches. No matter how many times they are brought down, their bodies will eventually regenerate. According to her, all of them share the exact same curse. They are immortal beings trapped in endless suffering. Alba immediately rejects her argument. With tears forming in his eyes, he insists that immortality is not an excuse to hurt others. He says that enough people have suffered already. He does not want to watch Lineria suffer. He does not want to watch Lupinus suffer. And surprisingly, he admits that he does not want to watch Physalis suffer either. Looking directly at her, he says that he does not want to see her making such a painful expression anymore. The words cause Physalis to hesitate ever so slightly. Alba continues speaking. He asks her to stop everything and return home. He reminds her that Iris and her husband are still waiting for her. Somewhere out there are still people who care about her. There are still people waiting for her return. For a brief moment, the smile on Physalis's face disappears. A complicated emotion flickers to her eyes. However, the moment quickly passes. The smile returns once more. She quietly remarks that Alba is far too kind. At the same time, deep within her heart, she notices something painful. Just as always, she still cannot hear anything from the people she truly wants to reach. The curse continues separating her from everyone else. Alba desperately calls her name again. Instead of responding, Physalis suddenly throws the knife. The blade flies through the air and lands directly in front of Alba's feet. Everyone stares at it. Physalis then presents a proposal. She tells Alba to pick up the knife and fight her alone. If he wins, she promises that she will give up pursuing the three of them. The offer immediately shocks everyone present. Alba slowly lowers his gaze toward the knife. After several moments of hesitation, he reaches down and picks it up. His expression becomes firm. He quietly states that he hopes she intends to keep her promise. The moment Lupinus hears those words, panic overwhelms her. She desperately asks what he is thinking. However, Alba continues walking forward without answering. Lupinus's voice becomes increasingly frantic. She reminds him that he heard everything. Witches are immortal. They can revive even after being brought down. Alba, however, is different. If he falls here, there will be no second chance. Tears stream down her face as she tells him that she absolutely cannot accept that outcome. Lineria is no calmer. For perhaps the first time since arriving, genuine fear becomes visible in her expression. Through trembling tears, she asks how she is supposed to continue living if something happens to Alba. Even if witches can survive being brought down, that does not mean she wants to watch her disciple throw his life away. She insists that she and Lupinus would rather suffer the pain themselves than see Alba placed in danger. Yet despite their protests, Alba continues moving forward. Step by step, he approaches Physalis. The ruined castle remains silent around them. Lineria bleeds from her wound. Lupinus cries desperately behind him. Physalis watches him with unreadable eyes. And before the immortal witch stands a completely mortal boy, gripping a knife in trembling hands as he prepares to face someone who cannot truly be defeated through ordinary means. Physalis suddenly begins laughing, and the sound echoes throughout the ruined chamber as she listens to the desperate cries coming from Lupinus and Lineria. Rather than being disturbed by their pain, she appears strangely satisfied by it. She remarks that the screams of their hearts were pleasant to hear and says that she finally understands why they have all been so silent for so long. Looking toward the two witches, she explains that one of them suffers from the curse of seeing every living being as a monster, while the other suffers from the curse of being seen as a monster by every living thing. Although she admits that she does not completely understand the exact mechanism behind the curses, she believes that they somehow cancel each other out whenever they interact. For this reason, they are able to see one another as ordinary humans rather than monsters. Her gaze then shifts toward Alba. She points out that he is completely different from all of them. The curses have absolutely no effect on him. Unlike everyone else, he can see every single one of them as human beings. Alba's eyes widen as he listens to her explanation. Physalis continues, saying that Alba's existence is the reason the others are capable of smiling. He is the bridge connecting people who would otherwise remain trapped in loneliness. However, if he dies here, everything will return to how it used to be. The fragile balance holding their world together will disappear. The witches will once again be left alone with their suffering. For this reason, she insists that all witches must share the same pain equally. Nobody has the right to escape it while others continue enduring it. She refuses to allow Alba to decide the outcome on his own. Alba tightens his grip on the knife and reminds her of their agreement. If he wins, she will withdraw and leave everyone alone. Physalis immediately confirms that she intends to keep her promise. As she says this, she drags the injured Lineria across the floor. Seeing his master treated so carelessly causes Alba's expression to darken. Nearby, Lineria desperately shouts his name, trying to stop him before it is too late. Physalis then raises her knife and extends it toward him. With a faint smile, she asks whether they should begin. Alba silently raises his own blade in response. Behind him, Lupinus desperately cries out his name, but despite hearing her voice, he continues moving forward. Inside his heart, countless emotions begin surfacing. He thinks that perhaps this entire situation is the result of his own selfishness. In his mind, he apologizes to Lineria. He admits that he is a hopeless disciple who never listens to his master's instruction. He also apologizes to Lupinus. Once again, he has made her cry. Once again, he has become the source of her pain. As the distance between him and Physalis closes, he realizes that he is no longer the same person he once was. The battle begins almost instantly. Physalis moves first. Her knife flashes through the air and pierces directly through Alba's hand before he can fully react. Pain surges throughout his body and blood begins dripping onto the floor. However, even as he suffers, his thoughts drift elsewhere. For most of his life, he considered himself empty. It never mattered where he lived or where he died. He believed his life was nothing more than a hollow existence. Yet that is no longer true. He remembers Lineria, the woman who gave him a name and a purpose. He remembers Lupinus, his very first friend and the first person outside his master who made him feel needed. Together, they filled the emptiness that once defined him. He understands that immortal witches are burdened with problems far beyond his understanding. Perhaps their suffering is not something he should interfere with. However, there is one thing he knows with absolute certainty. He cannot stand by and watch them cry. He wants to see them smile. If he fails to act now, he knows he will regret it for the rest of his life. For this reason, he moves. Ignoring the pain in his wounded hand, Alba lunges forward. His knife drives straight toward Physalis and pierces directly through her heart. A shocked expression appears on Physalis's face. The strength leaves her body. Slowly, she begins collapsing as consciousness fades from her eyes. Alba lets out a strained breath. Then, without warning, the world around him changes completely. The ruined castle disappears. The sounds of battle vanish. Even the pain in his hand fades away. Suddenly, he finds himself standing in an unfamiliar place. The atmosphere is calm and strangely peaceful. Looking around in confusion, he cannot recognize anything surrounding him. A question immediately forms in his mind. Where is this place? Before he can investigate further, a familiar voice calls out from behind him. The voice belongs to Physalis. Alba nearly jumps out of his skin. He spins around so quickly that he loses his balance and falls onto the ground. Standing behind him is Physalis herself. Unlike before, there is no blood covering her body, no madness in her eyes, and no hostility in her expression. She simply stands there watching him. Seeing his reaction, she casually remarks that there is no reason to be so frightened and points out that screaming whenever a girl calls out to him is incredibly insensitive. Alba immediately protests. According to him, anyone would panic if the person who stabbed them suddenly appeared behind them. He then demands to know where they are. Panic begins rising inside him as another possibility enters his mind. He wonders whether he has died. Physalis responds that perhaps he has. Hearing that answer causes Alba to sink onto the ground. His shoulders slump as his thoughts immediately drift toward Lineria and Lupinus. He then points out that Physalis is immortal, meaning she will simply revive again even if she dies. Physalis quietly admits that he is probably correct. She then casually explains that the version of her currently outside has completely lost control. Alba immediately complains that she speaks as though it is someone else's problem. Physalis merely shrugs. According to her, sitting around worrying will only become boring. Instead, she invites him to sit beside her. She pats the empty space next to where she is sitting. Alba remains visibly skeptical. Physalis notices his expression and tells him that if he intends to apologize, he should not bother. In her opinion, people should avoid doing cruel things from the beginning rather than apologizing afterward. Alba responds that she can talk all she wants, but there is no guarantee that he will actually listen. Physalis pouts slightly and remarks that his attitude is rather cold. Then she smiles. For the first time, the smile appears genuine rather than unsettling. She quietly comments that this place is peaceful. The hatred and violence from the battlefield feel incredibly distant. After a long silence, Physalis finally begins speaking again. She says that the version of her outside was jealous of Lineria, a woman who somehow managed to get along with a young boy. Alba immediately asks what that is even supposed to mean. Physalis simply tells him to listen for a while. Alba replies that she can talk if she wants, but he does not know whether he will actually pay attention. Physalis laughs softly and says that he is colder than she expected. The peaceful atmosphere remains unchanged as she gazes into the distance. After another brief silence, she finally says that she wants to tell him a story. It is a story about a young girl. And with those words, Physalis begins recounting the tale of her past. The story then shifts far into the past and begins revealing the life of Physalis long before she becomes the broken and hateful witch seen in the present. At the center of a prosperous town, the young noblewoman quietly walks through the streets while the townspeople watch her from a distance. As she passes by, two women can be seen whispering among themselves. One of them comments that the feudal lord's daughter is as beautiful as ever. She remarks that Physalis always carries herself with a wise and dignified presence, exactly as one would expect from the young head of the Inford house. However, before she can continue, the other woman nervously interrupts and warns her to lower her voice since Physalis might be able to hear them. Despite the conversation taking place nearby, Physalis simply stands there in silence. Rather than appearing proud of the praise being directed toward her, she seems distant, as though her mind is occupied by something else entirely. A short while later, an older woman approaches her. The woman, whom Physalis affectionately calls Wani-sama, notices her absent-minded expression and immediately asks what she is spacing out about. Reaching forward, she gently holds Physalis's face and reminds her that they are currently inspecting their territory. For this reason, it would create problems if the young lord appeared distracted and uninterested. Furthermore, she reminds Physalis that she must always carry herself as a proper member of the Inford family. Hearing this only causes Physalis to lower her gaze. She quietly admits that she feels useless no matter where they go. Wani-sama immediately stares at her before telling her to have more confidence in herself. However, Physalis cannot bring herself to agree. She points out that while she possesses far more magical energy than an ordinary person, an amount so large that most people would consider it abnormal, she lacks everything else that truly matters. She has neither knowledge nor talent. She lacks the foresight necessary for advanced magical research and cannot properly use the immense power she was born with. Looking visibly dejected, she reveals that many people even call her a water tank. To them, she is nothing more than a container overflowing with magical energy. The nickname clearly hurts her, even if she tries to laugh about it. Seeing her reaction, Wani-sama places a reassuring hand on her shoulder and firmly tells her not to think so poorly of herself. She explains that the territory has benefited enormously from Physalis's magical power. Every single day, Physalis continuously maintains the enormous barrier protecting the region from monsters. She performs this task without rest, allowing countless citizens to live peacefully and safely. For this reason, both the town and Wani-sama herself consider Physalis an incredibly precious existence. As she says these words, a bright and sincere smile appears on her face. Hearing such heartfelt praise causes Physalis's expression to soften. The kindness in those words clearly reaches her. Wani-sama then continues by telling her to be a little more patient. The magical circle she has been researching is nearing completion. Once it is finished, Physalis will no longer have to worry about being unable to properly use magic. Wani-sama's dream is to create a world where anyone can use high-ranking magic regardless of natural talent. If that becomes possible, then discrimination based on magical ability should disappear entirely. Turning toward Physalis with determination shining in her eyes, she boldly declares that she will make her capable of using magic. Upon hearing this promise, Physalis finally smiles. Looking far more hopeful than before, she replies that she is looking forward to that day. Several years pass. The scene shifts to a barren training field. Standing in the middle of the empty landscape, Physalis carefully activates a spell. A moment later, a fireball shoots forward and ignites a distant tree. The moment she sees the flames spreading across the bark, her eyes widen in astonishment. Excitement immediately fills her face as she turns toward Wanisama and enthusiastically asks whether she saw it. For the first time in her life, she has successfully used magic. Wanisama becomes equally excited. She proudly explains that the success was possible because she finally completed the internal magic circle designed specifically for Physalis. Thanks to that circle, Physalis no longer needs to pour absurd amounts of magical energy into every spell. Even a small amount of mana is enough to activate magic properly now. Physalis looks at her own hands in wonder. She says that the experience feels amazing. This is what it feels like to use magic. Even after casting the spell, she does not feel exhausted. Wanisama happily explains that this result is only natural, since Physalis possesses such a massive amount of magical power. A spell that would normally drain an ordinary person barely affects her at all. Listening to this explanation, Physalis innocently wonders whether everyone else is simply weak. The question causes Wanisama to smile awkwardly. However, Physalis is already overflowing with curiosity. She eagerly asks whether there are any other interesting spells she can try. She wants to experiment with everything she can. Wanisama explains that there is only one completed magic circle for now. She then begins discussing her latest research. Internal magic circles disappear once they are extracted from a person, making duplication extremely difficult. Furthermore, every internal magic circle contains unique protections created by its original owner. These protections make copying the magic extraordinarily challenging. Physalis listens carefully before asking whether that means magic circles can only be transferred rather than duplicated. Wanisama replies that this appears to be the case. According to her research, internal magic circles are deeply connected to the ideas and intentions of the individuals who created them. For this reason, she believes it would be helpful if they could consult the Great Sage directly. The mention of the Great Sage immediately captures Physalis' attention. She asks whether this is the same legendary figure who wiped out countless monsters and changed the course of history. Wanisama confirms that it is. She describes him as the greatest magician who has ever lived. After all, he was the one who discovered the system of internal magic circles in the first place. Thanks to his achievements, humanity gained the ability to use magic on a scale that had previously been impossible. To many people, he is nothing less than humanity's beacon of hope. After finishing the explanation, Wanisama decides that the lesson is over and shifts the conversation back toward the future. She explains that her research into duplication magic is nearly complete. If people can freely share magical abilities, many pointless conflicts between humans might disappear. In her opinion, it would be unfortunate if magic existed only as a tool for killing monsters. Then, leaning closer to Physalis, she excitedly declares that she intends to make her the strongest magician in the world. Physalis cannot help smiling at the ambitious statement. She gently remarks that such a thing sounds more like a dream than reality. Rather than being discouraged, Wanisama becomes even more enthusiastic. She asks whether there is truly any limit to what people are allowed to dream about. If they continue working hard, perhaps even impossible goals can become reality. Inspired by her optimism, Physalis quietly promises that she will continue doing everything she can. As time continues passing, Physalis often reflects on the strange nature of the magic circles she acquires. Occasionally, she wonders what happened to the original owners of abilities such as fireball magic. However, those thoughts never linger for long. Thanks to Wanisama's transfer magic, the powerless girl who once could not cast a single spell gradually becomes someone capable of wielding numerous powerful magic circles. The number of things she can accomplish continues increasing. With every passing year, her reputation grows. She begins believing that perhaps she really can become a great magician someday. Perhaps she might even earn recognition comparable to the legendary sages themselves. Eventually, humanity's war against the monsters reaches a turning point. Once the advantage provided by advanced magic becomes clear, victory begins arriving one battlefield after another. The tide of war shifts dramatically in humanity's favor. To bring the conflict to a final conclusion, 13 extraordinary magicians are selected. These individuals become known as the 13 Sages and are entrusted with eliminating the remaining monsters scattered throughout the world. Naturally, Physalis is chosen among them. At the time, no one questions the honor bestowed upon the Sages. They are celebrated as heroes destined to save humanity. Driven by their determination and the countless sacrifices made throughout the war, the 13 Sages tirelessly continue fighting. Through their combined efforts, humanity finally achieves its long-awaited victory. The seemingly endless war comes to an end. The surviving sages return home carrying the glory of their accomplishments in their hearts. The world celebrates them as legends who secured mankind's future, or at least, that is how the story is supposed to end. However, the tragedy awaiting the 13 sages has only just begun. The story then shifts to one of the most tragic moments in Physaelis's past. After returning from the long campaign against the remaining monsters, she finally arrives at her family's estate. The moment she pushes open the large doors of the mansion, she immediately begins calling out for her sister. Her voice echoes through the building as she repeatedly asks whether Mytoria is there and announces that she has finally returned from the monster subjugation. However, despite her calls, no immediate response comes. The silence only makes her more uneasy. A few moments later, 2 maids rush forward to greet her. They warmly welcome her home and express their happiness that she has returned safely. They explain that everyone has been waiting for her return. However, Physaelis barely reacts to their words. Her expression is filled with agitation and confusion. Ever since receiving the curse known as the voice of immorality, countless thoughts and emotions from the people around her continuously echo inside her mind. As the maids stand before her, disturbing voices begin ringing through her head. She hears thoughts describing her as a troublesome magic-wielding monster. Other voices speak of her with disgust, questioning why such a barbaric woman could possibly be related to someone as wonderful as Mytoria. The constant stream of thoughts becomes unbearable. For this reason, Physaelis suddenly covers her ears and desperately asks where her sister is. One of the maids quickly explains that Lady Mytoria is currently resting in her room and that she will certainly be happy to see her. Before the maid can even finish speaking, Physaelis abruptly snaps. She loudly orders them to stop talking and repeatedly demands silence. Both maids immediately freeze in confusion. One of them nervously points out that they are not saying anything at the moment. However, Physaelis completely ignores her. The voices inside her head continue growing louder and louder. Unable to endure them any longer, she rushes deeper into the mansion and heads directly toward her sister's room. As she runs through the corridors, memories of everything that happened begin resurfacing in her mind. She recalls how all 13 sages received terrible curses after the war ended. Her own curse allows her to hear the hidden thoughts buried within people's hearts. What initially seemed like a useful ability gradually became a nightmare. Every kind word becomes mixed with ugly truths. Every smile hides secret thoughts. Every relationship becomes stained by emotions people never intended to reveal. The curse slowly drives her toward madness. Even so, there remains one person she still believes in completely. She convinces herself that Mytoria will understand. Her beloved older sister has always protected her. Surely she will know how to help. Finally, Physaelis reaches the door and throws it open while shouting for her sister. Inside the room stands Mytoria. The moment she sees Physaelis, a bright smile immediately appears on her face. She warmly welcomes her home and expresses relief that she returned safely. The sight instantly overwhelms Physaelis with emotion. Tears begin forming in her eyes. For a brief moment, all of her fears seem to disappear. Mytoria extends her arms and says that she missed her dearly. She explains that she has spent every day worrying about her safety and that she could not find peace while Physaelis was away. Hearing those words nearly causes Physaelis to break down entirely. Deep inside her heart, she thinks that her sister truly is the only person she can trust. However, just as she begins rushing forward to embrace her, another voice suddenly echoes through her mind. "My vessel." Physaelis immediately freezes. The words do not come from Mytoria's mouth, they come from her heart. For several seconds, Physaelis simply stands there in stunned silence. Meanwhile, Mytoria continues smiling warmly. She tells her to sit down and rest after such a long journey. She says that she wants to hear all about her experiences. Yet hidden beneath those gentle words, Physaelis hears completely different thoughts. Mytoria internally thinks that it would be troublesome if Physaelis had been lost before becoming useful. She thinks about how the body standing before her will eventually belong to her. Every warm sentence becomes accompanied by a horrifying truth. Unable to endure it any longer, Physaelis quietly asks what exactly her sister is saying. Tears begin gathering in her eyes as she questions whether her body belongs to her or not. Mytoria appears confused by the sudden question. Outwardly, she acts as though she has no idea what Physaelis is talking about. Internally, however, her thoughts continue flowing into Physaelis's mind without mercy. She wonders why her usually naive younger sister is suddenly asking such sharp questions. As she casually sips her tea, another thought surfaces. She reflects that she originally intended to wait until Physalis acquired even more powerful magic before taking her body. However, perhaps now would be an acceptable time as well. At that moment, everything finally becomes clear. Physalis remembers the magic circle her sister possesses, Magic Eater, the ability capable of stealing the internal magic circles of others. Throughout the years, Mytoria had continuously transferred stolen magic circles into Physalis. What appeared to be acts of kindness and support now reveal an entirely different purpose. Physalis finally realizes that her sister never intended to help her become stronger for her own sake. She was cultivating a perfect vessel. One day, after enough powerful magic had accumulated within Physalis's body, Mytoria planned to take everything for herself. The realization completely shatters her. Her entire body trembles. Even so, she asks one final question. Looking directly at her sister, she asks what she truly means to her. Mytoria immediately answers with the same loving smile she has always shown. She says that Physalis is her precious and beloved younger sister. She insists that the answer should be obvious. Yet at the exact same moment, another voice echoes within Physalis's mind. Mytoria's true thoughts reveal that Physalis is nothing more than a tool, a stepping stone, a means to achieve her dream of becoming the next great sage. For a long moment, silence fills the room. Then Physalis quietly thanks her. Mytoria appears confused and asks what she means. Physalis repeats her gratitude. She thanks her for everything. She thanks her for all the years they spent together. She thanks her for every lesson, every smile, every memory. At the same time, tears continue streaming down her face. Then she raises her hand. The atmosphere inside the room instantly changes. Mytoria's eyes widen as she realizes that magical power is gathering around Physalis. She immediately rises from her chair and demands to know what she is doing. Almost simultaneously, she begins activating her own magic. A violent explosion of power erupts. A spray of blood follows. For a brief instant, Physalis remembers all of the happy moments they shared together. She remembers her sister encouraging her, teaching her, smiling beside her. Deep within her heart, she continues thinking that she loves her. Then the attack reaches its target. Mytoria's head is destroyed instantly. Her body collapses lifelessly onto the floor. The room becomes completely silent. Nothing moves, nothing speaks, only the sound of Physalis's breathing remains. She stands there staring at the body of the person she loved most in the world. The reality of what has just happened slowly sinks in. The sister she trusted more than anyone else is gone. The person she wanted to rely on was the very one who betrayed her. Overwhelmed by grief, shock, and regret, Physalis collapses to her knees. Tears pour endlessly from her eyes as she stares at the aftermath of her own action. In that silent room, surrounded by blood and shattered dreams, the future great sage begins crying uncontrollably, unable to understand whether she has escaped a betrayal or destroyed the last precious thing she had left. After listening to the heartbreaking story of Physalis's past, Alba falls silent for quite some time. The tragedy she endured leaves a heavy feeling in his chest. Although he still cannot forgive everything she has done, he can no longer view her as nothing more than a villain. Eventually, after carefully organizing his thoughts, he admits that there is one thing he still does not understand. Physalis looks toward him and calmly asks what is troubling him. Alba then raises a question that has been bothering him ever since hearing about her curse. He asks how she was ever able to have a family in the first place if she constantly hears the hidden thoughts of everyone around her. Physalis remains quiet for a brief moment before answering. She explains that there were two people who were different from everyone else. No matter what happened, those individuals never held any ill will toward her. Regardless of her mistakes, regardless of her awkwardness, and regardless of the burden she carried, they always accepted her. Whenever she failed at something, they simply laughed it off as something that could not be helped. They never judged her. They never feared her. For this reason, the time she spent with them was genuinely peaceful. As she recalls those memories, a faint smile appears on her face. Even now, despite everything that has happened, those memories remain precious to her. However, Alba cannot allow the conversation to end there. Looking directly at her, he asks why she attacked Lupanus if that was the case. He asks why she went so far and why she was willing to inflict such cruelty upon others. Hearing the question, Physalis lowers her gaze slightly. Her expression becomes more complicated than before. She explains that she simply wanted to grow old and eventually reach a natural end. The endless cycle of immortality had become unbearable. More than anything else, she could no longer tolerate being alone. When she learned about Lupinus's magic and the possibility of creating magical beings through the use of another soul, she became obsessed with the idea. She convinced herself that perhaps there was a way to escape the cursed existence she had been trapped within for so long. She quietly admits that beyond all of her excuses, she is sorry for trying to harm Alba. At the time, she found him frustrating. She could tolerate the fact that he remained silent to her curse, but Linaria's existence disturbed her even more. Every witch she had ever known eventually lost their sanity to one degree or another. For this reason, seeing Linaria living so freely alongside another person felt completely unnatural. Physalis then stops trying to justify herself. She admits that hiding behind excuses is meaningless now. Looking away, she confesses that she has not done a very good job as either a wife or a mother. Even though her family loves her dearly, she lacks the confidence to believe that things can remain that way forever. Deep inside her heart, she is terrified. She fears losing someone precious again. Even worse, she fears becoming the person who destroys those precious bonds with her own hands. Those fears have followed her for years, slowly consuming her from within. As she speaks, her voice becomes quieter and quieter, as though she is finally revealing thoughts she has never shared with anyone before. Alba listens carefully to every word. After a long silence, he finally responds. He points out that meeting people like that should have been a blessing. In his opinion, finding individuals worthy of trust is something incredibly precious. He asks whether she truly found nothing in those relationships worth believing in. Then, without softening his words, he reminds her of everything she did afterward. He tells her that she betrayed her friends. She betrayed the people who cared about her. She betrayed those who trusted her. Even now, despite understanding her suffering, he still cannot forgive those actions. Hearing such blunt honesty causes Physalis to smile slightly. Rather than becoming angry, she remarks that Alba is surprisingly cheeky for someone in his position. The conversation grows quieter after that. Physalis repeats the words family and friends under her breath as though she is tasting their meaning once more. Alba then tells her that if she truly regrets what she has done, she should apologize to them after she revives. The suggestion causes her smile to widen ever so slightly. She admits that he is probably right. If given the opportunity, she would like to speak with them properly one more time. She would like to sit down and talk with them as friends rather than as someone hiding behind lies and regrets. However, Alba immediately notices something strange about her wording. She says that she would like to do so if she ever gets the chance to meet them again. Confused, he asks what she means by that. Physalis responds by changing the subject slightly. She tells him that there is something important he needs to know. Her expression becomes unusually serious as she warns him to watch out for the Witch of Detachment. According to her, that witch will almost certainly come after him someday. Alba becomes visibly nervous as he listens. Physalis explains that among all the people in the world, Alba may be the only person capable of truly bringing an immortal witch to a final end. The revelation immediately sends a chill through him. Despite the seriousness of the warning, Physalis smiles once again. She casually mentions that the Witch of Detachment is actually her friend, although she describes her as a slightly troublesome one. Then, almost jokingly, she says that she will leave that problem in Alba's hands when the time eventually comes. Alba is about to protest when a sudden realization strikes him. His eyes widen in alarm. He finally understands what her words have been implying this entire time. Looking at her fading figure, he asks what she means about bringing a witch to an end. More importantly, he asks what is happening to her body right now. Physalis simply smiles. The answer becomes obvious without her needing to explain it. As Alba watches, her form gradually begins dissolving into countless particles of light. The process is slow but unmistakable. Panic immediately fills him. He calls out to her, but she continues fading away. Looking at him one final time, she thanks him. Her smile contains none of the madness, bitterness, or resentment that defined her before. Instead, it is peaceful. She thanks him for everything. Most importantly, she thanks him for finally bringing her long suffering to an end. Alba desperately tries to stop her. He insists that there are still things he wants to ask. There are still things he does not understand. However, Physalis continues disappearing before his eyes. Her final words are filled with gratitude as she once again thanks him for setting her free. Then she vanishes completely. The empty space where she stood remains silent. For several moments, Alba simply stands there frozen in shock. The conversation ends so suddenly that he can barely process what has happened. Countless questions continue racing through his mind. The warning about the Witch of Detachment, the revelation about immortal witches, the meaning behind her final disappearance. None of it makes complete sense yet. All he knows is that Physalis is gone. Standing alone in that strange place, Alba stares at the empty air where she vanished and silently struggles to come to terms with the end of a story that began with hatred, continued through tragedy, and concluded with a farewell he never expected to receive. The story then shifts back to Lunaria's mansion sometime after the events surrounding Physalis have finally come to an end. The atmosphere inside the mansion is unusually peaceful compared to everything that happened within the underground castle. Alba is currently asleep, exhausted from everything he endured. Resting comfortably in a bed, he remains completely unaware of the conversation taking place nearby. Sitting beside him, Lunaria quietly reaches out and gently pokes his cheek with her finger. A small smile appears on her face as she watches him sleeping so soundly. Looking at her disciple's peaceful expression, she quietly remarks that he truly is a careless person. After causing so much trouble and placing himself in so much danger, he still manages to sleep without a single worry on his face. Nearby, Lupinus sits at a table where fresh tea has been prepared. The room remains quiet for a while as both witches gather their thoughts. Eventually, Lunaria glances toward the cup in front of her and brings it to her lips. After taking a sip, she pauses briefly before admitting that the tea is surprisingly delicious. Hearing the compliment causes Lupinus to brighten slightly. She explains that the secret lies in lightly steaming the leaves beforehand. According to her, doing so improves the aroma and creates a smoother flavor. Lunaria immediately turns toward her with a suspicious expression. Narrowing her eyes slightly, she wonders aloud when exactly Lupinus became so skilled at such things. Lupinus smiles awkwardly before explaining that she often bakes cookies for her friends as well. The moment the word cookies leaves her mouth, Lunaria's reaction becomes unexpectedly dramatic. She immediately repeats the word in disbelief as though she has just heard something impossible. Lupinus stares at her in confusion while Lunaria continues muttering about cookies. She declares that this revelation completely exceeds her expectations. In her opinion, the idea of someone living under such harsh circumstances while happily baking cookies for friends is almost absurd. For a brief moment, she appears genuinely shaken by the information. When Lupinus asks why she suddenly seems upset, Lunaria immediately denies it. She loudly insists that she is not upset at all. Furthermore, she claims that her reaction has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that she does not have any friends herself. She also insists that it certainly has nothing to do with spending nearly all of her time studying magic. Most importantly, she emphasizes that there are definitely no personal reasons behind her reaction. The more she denies it, the more obvious the truth becomes. Lupinus can only watch her with an amused smile as Lunaria continues attempting to defend her dignity. As time passes, the conversation gradually becomes more natural. The two witches continue chatting while occasionally glancing toward the sleeping Alba nearby. Eventually, the topic shifts toward their respective curses. Lunaria explains that she is known as the Witch of Nightmare and that her curse causes her to perceive other living beings as horrifying monsters. Lupinus listens quietly before revealing that she is known as the Witch of Hatred. Her curse causes others to perceive her as something terrifying and hateful. Upon hearing that explanation, Lunaria bluntly admits that she genuinely hated Lupinus when they first met. Lupinus immediately responds by admitting that the feeling was mutual. The room suddenly falls silent. For several awkward moments, neither of them knows what to say. The honesty of the admission leaves an unusual tension hanging in the air. Then, almost as if their thoughts synchronize perfectly, both witches speak at exactly the same time. Each asks whether the other ran away long ago out of hatred. The realization that they asked the exact same question causes them to stop and stare at one another in surprise. After a brief pause, Lunaria becomes serious. Looking directly at Lupinus, she quietly admits that things might have turned out differently if Lupinus had not run away alone all those years ago. In Lunaria's opinion, they could have remained together even after the tragedy that separated them. They could have helped one another survive. They could have protected each other from the loneliness and suffering that followed. Her voice contains no accusation, only regret for what might have been. Lupinus listens silently as Lunaria continues. Lunaria explains that, at the time, she genuinely believed everyone was mocking her. For this reason, she ended up hating Lupinus along with everyone else around her. The bitterness she carried eventually consumed her. However, after reflecting on everything that has happened, she realizes that those feelings belong to the distant past. More than 100 years have passed since then. During that time, both of them experienced countless hardships, losses, and changes. The people they once were no longer exist. A gentle smile appears on Laneria's face. She explains that so much has happened throughout the last century that it feels almost impossible to compare their current selves to the children they once were. The concepts of family, home, and belonging became distant memories long ago. Both of them have walked separate paths for generations. They have suffered differently. They have changed differently. For this reason, dwelling endlessly on the past no longer serves any purpose. Then Laneria slowly extends her hand toward Lupinus. Her expression becomes unusually sincere. She suggests that rather than continuing to cling to old misunderstandings and regrets, they should simply start over. She proposes beginning again from the very beginning, not as enemies burdened by a century of resentment, but as two people willing to understand each other. For a moment, Lupinus simply stares at the offered hand. The gesture clearly catches her off guard, then a warm smile gradually spreads across her face. Without hesitation, she reaches forward and accepts it. As their hands meet, Lupinus quietly points out that there is no need for formalities between them anymore. Rather than calling her Lupinus, she asks Laneria to simply call her Luppy instead. Hearing this causes Laneria to smile faintly. She responds that if that is the case, then Lupinus should stop addressing her so formally as well. She suggests that they both abandon unnecessary distance. The atmosphere in the room immediately becomes lighter. As their hands remain clasped together, both witches agree that they should begin again from square one. The century of misunderstandings, resentment, and loneliness that once stood between them finally begins to fade away, and while Alba continues sleeping peacefully nearby, completely unaware of the significance of the moment, two witches who spent more than 100 years separated by hatred and misunderstanding finally reconcile, taking the first step toward a new future together. The story then shifts to another mansion during the middle of the night. The atmosphere is tense and unsettling as a woman hurriedly makes her way through the dimly lit corridors. Her footsteps echo loudly as she rushes toward the main staircase. The moment she reaches the bottom of the stairs, her expression twists with anger. Looking ahead, she immediately demands to know what Severance thinks she is doing inside her mansion. Standing among scattered corpses and pools of fresh blood is a young girl wearing a carefree smile that completely contradicts the horrifying scene surrounding her. The girl casually remarks that her host seems rather late before cheerfully greeting her after such a long time apart. However, the woman is in no mood for greetings. She angrily repeats her question and demands an explanation for the massacre taking place inside her home. The smiling girl casually explains that the people lying around them were extremely rude. According to her, they suddenly attacked her without warning. For this reason, she simply responded by cutting their bodies apart. She speaks as though discussing something completely ordinary rather than a room filled with bloodshed. The girl is revealed to be Kalmia Toloya, the Witch of Severance. Standing nearby is another silent girl who calmly observes the situation without reacting. The furious woman immediately turns toward her and demands to know why she failed to stop this madness. The woman is Quince Winstead, the Witch of Haze. The silent observer is Shaun Marduk, the Witch of Oblivion. Upon hearing the accusation, Shaun merely remains quiet as always. Meanwhile, Kalmia casually reveals the true reason for her visit. She explains that she came to collect Quince. Naturally, Quince has no idea what she is talking about and immediately asks what kind of nonsense she means. Kalmia's smile widens as she finally reveals the purpose behind her arrival. According to information recently obtained by their organization, a witch has permanently disappeared in the southern region. This information immediately captures everyone's attention. Kalmia explains that they are going to investigate the individual responsible. Her expression becomes noticeably darker as she states that they must locate the so-called witch killer and eliminate that person before more witches disappear. Both Shaun and Quince silently listen as the gravity of the situation settles over the room. The story then returns to Laneria's mansion. After everything that has happened, Alba slowly opens his eyes. For a brief moment he feels disoriented. Looking around, he realizes that he is lying in bed. Even more surprising is the fact that both Lupinus and Laneria are sleeping beside him. The peaceful scene feels almost unreal compared to the nightmare they recently endured.